Take it off, Emily, right now, before somebody sees you wearing it. Emily Carter stood in her dead grandfather's driveway holding a black leather jacket, and the woman who had baked her cookies since she was 6 was backing away from her like she'd picked up a loaded gun. Ruth, it's a jacket. It is not a jacket. Ruth Delgado's voice cracked. Child, do you know what that patch means? Then tell me. I can't. Nobody in this town can. Ruth was already at her gate. Burn it, please. Burn it before they find out it still exists. If you're new here, hit subscribe, stay with me to the very end, and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. The last time Emily Carter saw her grandfather alive, he was arguing with her about a carburetor. That was the thing nobody warned you about. People told you that grief hits you at the funeral or when the dirt goes down or when you open the closet. Nobody told you it would come at you sideways at 2:14 in the morning while you sat on a folding chair in an empty garage holding a carburetor, hearing an 81-year-old man's voice say, "You're rushing it, Em," and the part that's rushed is the part that fails. She hadn't cried at the service. 200 people showed up at the Silver Creek Methodist Church, and not one of them saw Emily Carter cry, and every single one of them noticed. She's in shock, they said. She's cold, said others quieter. They were both wrong. Emily wasn't in shock and she wasn't cold. She was doing what William Carter taught her to do when something was too heavy to lift. Get under it, brace your legs, and don't let anybody see your hands shake. She'd been under it for 9 days. Ruth Delgado came over the morning after the burial with a foil pan of enchiladas and a look on her face like she was visiting a hospital. You eating? Yes, ma'am. You're lying to me, buddy. Yes, ma'am. Ruth set the pan on the counter and didn't leave. That was Ruth's way. She'd stand in your kitchen for 40 minutes, not saying anything until you finally said the thing you'd been holding. Emily held it. You're going to go through his house today, Ruth said at last. Somebody has to. Somebody could be me, or Tommy, or that Boyle boy who's always hanging around your shop. Tommy is the Boyle boy. Then let Tommy. Ruth, Emily finally looked up. He raised me. When my mother left me at his door with a garbage bag of clothes and no note, he didn't call the county. He didn't call a lawyer. He just said, well, guess I got a kid now. I was 4, so no. Nobody else goes through his house. Ruth's mouth went tight. She looked at the window over the sink at the mesquite trees, at anything except Emily. She stopped. Just what? Nothing. Ruth? Nothing, mija. Ruth pushed the pan an inch closer like that was the answer. Eat the enchiladas. Emily would think about that pause for the rest of her life. That was the first one, the first crack in a wall she didn't even know was standing. William Carter's house was a 1961 ranch with a swamp cooler that groaned like an old dog and a porch he'd rebuilt 3 times because he never trusted anyone else's carpentry, including his own. Emily let herself in with the key she'd had since she was 9. The house still smelled like him, coffee and lava soap and that sharp metal ghost that never fully washes out of a man who spent 60 years with his hands inside engines. She stood in the entry for a long time. Okay, she said out loud to nobody. "'Kay, old man." She started with the easy rooms. The kitchen, 40-year-old Corel plates a coffee can of loose change, a drawer with 11 flashlights in it and not one working battery. The living room, a recliner with a permanent bill-shaped dent, a stack of Hemmings Motor News, going back to the Reagan administration, one photograph of Emily at 12 holding a torque wrench like a trophy. One photograph. That was the thing she noticed first, and it sat wrong in her chest without her knowing why. Most old men's houses are shrines, wedding pictures, army pictures, kids, grandkids, those fish buddies. Bill Carter had exactly one photograph in his whole house, and it was of her. "Where's everybody else?" she asked the empty room. The empty room didn't answer. Tommy Boyle showed up at noon with 2 sodas and the aggressively cheerful energy of a 23-year-old who had no idea what to do with a grieving person. "Brought the truck," he said, "for the Goodwill Run." "There's no Goodwill Run yet. There's always a Goodwill Run." He looked around. Man, Bill lived like a monk. He lived like a man who didn't want anything he couldn't carry. Tommy went quiet at that. Then Dale Whitaker came by the shop this morning. Emily's hand stopped. Dale Whitaker. Yeah. 9 days after we bury him, Dale Whitaker comes by. He said he was paying respects. What did he ask for? Tommy scratched the back of his neck. He asked if you were selling. Selling the shop. Selling the shop, the lot, Tommy's voice dropped. He said the whole strip, said there's a buyer looking at the whole east side of Mesa Road, and Bill's shop is the piece that's, holding it up. Holding it up, Emily repeated. His word, not mine. Emily set down the box she was holding very carefully because the alternative was throwing it. What did you tell him? I told him you'd rather be buried in that shop than sell it. Good. He laughed. Emily's head came up. He laughed. He said, Tommy winced. He said that's what her grandfather thought too. The swamp cooler groaned. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and gave up. Say that again, Emily said. Say it exactly. Tommy said it exactly. And Emily Carter, who had not cried at a funeral in front of 200 people, felt the first cold finger of something that wasn't grief at all walk straight up her spine. She saved the bedroom for last. Everybody does. There's an order to it that nobody teaches you, and everybody knows kitchen, living room, garage, bathroom, and then when you've run out of rooms to hide in the place where he slept. The bed was made. Of course it was. Bill Carter made his bed every morning of his life, including apparently the last one. She sat on it for a while, just sat. You could have told me you were sick, she said. The room said nothing. 8 months, Grandpa. The doctor said you knew for 8 months. Her voice went thin, and she hated it. You let me argue with you about a carburetor. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry quick, like wiping down a workbench. Then she opened the closet. It was nothing. That was the worst part. 3 flannel shirts, 2 pairs of Dickies, a church suit in a dry cleaner bag from 1994. Boots, a shoebox of receipts, a whole life, and it fit in 4 feet of hanging space. Emily started pulling, shirt, suit. She was going fast now because fast was the only speed that didn't hurt, and that's how her knuckles hit something at the very back that didn't move like fabric. It moved like weight. She stopped. She pushed the empty hangers aside, and there it was, hanging in the dark at the back of an old man's closet, wrapped in a garment bag, so ancient the plastic had gone the color of weak tea. Emily stood there with her hand on the zipper for probably 10 full seconds. Later, she would swear she knew. Not what it was, but that it was something. That the second she pulled that zipper, the man she had loved for 22 years was going to become a stranger. She pulled it anyway. Black leather, cracked at the elbows. Heavier than any jacket had a right to be, the way old leather gets when it's been rained on and dried out and rained on again for 50 years. Emily lifted it out and held it up by the shoulders, and she laughed, out loud, in an empty house. A real laugh shocked right out of her. She said, you had a leather jacket, because it was absurd. Bill Carter wore flannel. Bill Carter drove a 1988 F-150 at 9 miles under the speed limit. Bill Carter went to bed at 9:30 and thought the Eagles were a little loud. Bill Carter did not own a motorcycle jacket. Emily hugged it stupidly, the way you hug a thing that smells like a person. And it did. Underneath the mildew and the closet dust, it smelled like him. That was when she turned it around. The house went very quiet. Emily's hands did not shake. This is important. Her hands did not shake because she was a mechanic, and a mechanic's hands do not shake. They just get very, very still. Stitched across the back of the jacket, sun-faded, thread-worn one corner, lifting where the stitching had rotted, was a patch, a winged skull. And underneath it, in an arc she had seen on television and on highways, and one time in her whole life on the back of 11 men riding through Silver Creek in formation, while the entire town found something else to look at. Hell's Angels. Emily didn't move. The swamp cooler groaned. Somewhere in the back of her skull, a voice that sounded exactly like her grandfather said, sit down before you fall down. She sat down on his made bed, holding his jacket, and she said out loud in a small, flat voice, no. She turned it over again like it might have changed. She turned it back. She ran her thumb across the stitching, half convinced it was a costume, a gag, a thing he bought at a swap meet in 1978. But her thumb told her the truth before her brain would take it. The thread was hand-sewn. The leather underneath the patch was a different color than the leather around it. Darker, protected, unfaded, which meant the patch had been on that jacket for decades before it ever went in a closet. "Grandpa," she said. "Nothing." "Grandpa, what is this?" "Nothing." She thought about every single thing she knew about William Carter. He never talked about being young, ever. She'd asked, of course she'd asked, she was a kid kids ask. "Where'd you grow up, Grandpa?" Around, were you in the war?" "Grandpa, different war than you're thinking of." "Grandpa, why don't you have any pictures of you when you were young?" And he had said she remembered this perfectly now, remembered it the way you suddenly remember a road sign you drove past 100 times, he had said, "because that fella and me don't talk anymore." She'd been 10. She'd laughed. She thought it was a joke. Emily sat on a dead man's bed with a Hell's Angels jacket in her lap and thought that wasn't a joke. So she was still sitting there when Ruth Delgado let herself in through the kitchen door, calling out the way she called out for 30 years. "Bill, Emily, I brought the pan back." And then Ruth was in the bedroom doorway. And Ruth Delgado, 68 years old, church every Sunday, raised 4 boys, buried a husband, never scared of anything in her life, looked at that jacket and turned the color of dishwater. "Ruth, where did you get that?" "It was in his closet." "Ruth, sit down. You look. Where did you get that?" Emily stood up slowly. "The back of his closet, in a bag." "Ruth, what's wrong with you?" Ruth Delgado didn't answer. She backed out of the bedroom. Emily followed her down the hall, through the kitchen, out the door into the driveway, still holding the jacket because she genuinely did not think to put it down. That's when Ruth said it. "Take it off, Emily, right now, before somebody sees you wearing it." "I'm not wearing it. I'm holding it." "It is not a jacket," Ruth said, and her voice cracked clean in half. "Child, do you know what that patch means?" "Then tell me." "I can't." Ruth was at her gate now, one hand on it. "Nobody in this town can." "Ruth, burn it, please. Burn it before they find out it still exists." And the woman who had bandaged Emily's knees and taught her to make tortillas and sat with her through chicken pox went into her house and closed the door, and Emily heard it across 40 feet of gravel in the middle of the afternoon in Silver Creek, Arizona, where nobody had locked a door since 1974. Ruth Delgado threw the deadbolt. Emily stood in the driveway for a long time. Then she went back inside and did the only thing she knew how to do when a system stopped making sense. She stopped guessing, and she started taking it apart. She laid the jacket on the kitchen table under the good light. "Okay," she said. "You're a machine. Everything's a machine. What are you telling me?" She started at the collar and worked down the way she'd work a wiring harness. Finding one, the leather was heavy, not fashion heavy, horsehide. Real horsehide, the kind they stopped making because it cost too much and lasted too long. Finding 2, the zipper was a Talon. Nobody had put a Talon in a jacket since the 60s. Finding 3, there was a repair on the left shoulder. Somebody had stitched it by hand badly with a curved needle, and Emily knew that stitch. She'd seen that stitch on a canvas seat cover in a 52 Chevy her grandfather had rebuilt, because it was his stitch he sewed like he welded ugly and permanent. Finding 4, the left sleeve was worn smooth at the elbow. The right one wasn't. She sat back. You leaned on your left elbow for years," which meant a bar or a window or a bike. Finding 5, and this was the one that stopped her breath. There was a shape in the lining. She almost missed it. It was in the bottom hem on the left side, a rectangle so thin you'd have to be running your hands over every inch of the thing to notice which is exactly what she was doing. She got a seam ripper from his junk drawer. Old man had everything. "I'm sorry," she said to the jacket, which was insane, and she said it anyway. "I'm sorry I have to." She opened 3 inches of hem. A folded piece of paper came out. Lined paper torn from a spiral notebook folded into a hard little square, the way you fold something you don't intend anyone to find until you're gone. Emily's hands were completely still. She unfolded it. She knew the handwriting before she read a word. She'd been reading that handwriting on parts orders and birthday cards and "back by 6, don't touch the lift." Notes taped to the shop door her entire life. 11 words. "If you ever find this jacket, find Jack Reynolds. He will tell you the truth about who I really was." Emily read it 4 times. Then she said to a dead man in an empty kitchen, "Who you really were." And then louder, and her voice broke on it, the first time it had broken in 9 days. "Who the hell were you?" She didn't cry. She got mad. That was Bill Carter's real inheritance, the ability to convert grief into torque. She went and got her laptop out of the truck and sat down at his kitchen table at 4:40 in the afternoon and typed 3 words into a search bar. Jack Reynolds, Arizona. And the internet said yes. Oh yes, not a lot, not much, but enough. A 2009 newspaper piece about a charity toy run 400 bikes rolling into Flagstaff, and a photograph of a man with silver hair and a gray beard handing a wrap box to a kid in a wheelchair. Caption: J. Reynolds, organizer. A 1994 court docket. Case dismissed. A message board thread from 2016 where somebody asked a question and somebody else replied, "Don't say that name on the internet, brother." And one obituary from 2003 for a man named Ray something, which ended with a line that made the hair stand up on Emily's arms. He rode with Bill and Jack in the old days when it meant something. Emily sat very still. "Bill," she said. "Sayana." She was still staring at that screen when the knock came. Not Ruth's knock, not Tommy's knock. 3 raps evenly spaced patient the knock of a man who has never in his life had to wonder whether a door would open. Emily looked at the clock. 5:52 p.m. She folded the note into her back pocket. She threw a dish towel over the jacket on the table. Then she opened the door. The man on William Carter's porch was wearing $400 of casual. That was Emily's first thought, that everything he had on was expensive and none of it was showy, which is a specific kind of expensive. Charcoal quarter zip, boots that had never seen a job site, a watch that cost more than her truck. He was maybe 50, silver at the temples, the kind of tan you get from leisure. Behind him at the curb, a black Range Rover idled with a second man in the driver's seat who did not get out and did not look over. "Emily Carter," he said, "not a question. Do I know you, You don't. My name is Victor Hayes." He offered a hand. "I'm sorry for your loss, genuinely." She didn't take the hand. He didn't seem to mind. He let it drop like it had been a formality all along. "Your grandfather was a fixture in this town," Victor Hayes said. "I don't think I ever heard a single person say a bad word about him." "Then you asked the wrong people," Emily said. "He was mean about tools." Hayes laughed. It was a good laugh. Warm, practiced. Emily didn't laugh. "Mr. Hayes, it's 6 o'clock. My grandfather's been in the ground 9 days. What do you want?" And this was the moment Emily would replay this moment 1,000 times. This was the moment the warmth switched off cleanly like a shop light. "I want you to give me the jacket," he said. The desert made its noises. A car went by 2 streets over. Emily's heart was doing something loud and stupid in her ears. "What jacket?" she said. "Emily." "What jacket?" Victor Hayes sighed like a man dealing with a child who is technically correct. "You found it this afternoon," he said. "In the closet, in a garment bag. You brought it to the kitchen table, which I'd guess is where it is right now, under that dish towel." Emily's blood went to ice water. "He knows what room I was in. Get off my grandfather's porch." "I'm going to make this very easy for you," Hayes said, unbothered. "You don't want that thing. Nobody wants that thing. It's 50 years old. It smells like a basement, and the only value it has is the trouble attached to it. You seem awful interested in a worthless jacket." "I'm interested in you," he said. "You're 26. You run a 2-bay shop that clears, what, 40 a year? 50 in a good year. You have a truck with 240,000 miles on it and a grandfather-shaped hole in your life, and no one left in this town who'll tell you the truth about anything." He said it gently. That was the horror of it. He said it kindly. "I'm trying to help you before something starts that you can't stop." "Before what starts?" "Give me the jacket and nothing starts. That's the entire point." Emily gripped the doorframe. "Why do you care about an old jacket that belonged to my grandfather?" And Victor Hayes looked at her. He looked at her for a long, long moment, and something moved behind his eyes. Emily could not name it then, and it would be weeks before she understood she'd been looking at fear wearing a very good watch. "Some memories," he said, "are better left buried." He turned to go. He got 3 steps down the walk. Emily heard her own voice say, "How much?" Hayes stopped. He turned around and he was smiling now because this he understood. This was a language he spoke. 5,000, he said, cash. Tonight, Emily's mouth was dry. For a jacket that smells like a basement. For your peace of mind. 10, Emily said, done. He said it instantly, no pause, no haggle, no breath. And Emily Carter, who had spent 7 years watching men try to talk her down on a brake job, felt the floor tilt under her. 25, she said. Done. 100. Emily, $100,000, Mr. Hayes. Her voice was shaking now and she let it, for an old jacket. Victor Hayes stood on the walk in the dying light and did not say no. He said 250, wired tomorrow morning, and a signed paper that says you never saw it, never opened it, and don't know the name of anybody it belonged to. The desert was very, very quiet. Get off my property, Emily whispered. Emily, get off my grandfather's property. She locked the door. She had never in her life locked that door. Then she stood in the dark kitchen with her back against it and her hands over her mouth and did the math out loud because the sound of her own voice was the only thing keeping her upright. $250,000. Her breath was ragged. $250,000 for a jacket. She pulled the dish towel off it. The winged skull looked back at her. You're not a jacket, Emily said slowly. You're not a jacket at all. You're evidence. And somewhere under the terror, something else lit up, something Bill Carter had put in her and never labeled the thing that made her take on jobs she couldn't afford to lose money on the thing that made her stay under a truck at midnight because she'd said she'd have it done by morning. Never run from injustice, Em, and never let a man tell you what a thing is worth when he's the one buying it. Emily Carter laughed out loud in a dead man's kitchen. It came out closer to a sob. Oh, you sneaky old man. She called Tommy at 8:15. Tell me about Dale Whitaker's buyer. What? The buyer for the east side of Mesa Road. Who is it? Em, it's 8 o'clock. Are you? Who is it, Tommy? She heard him swallow. Hayes Development. Emily closed her eyes. Say the first name. Victor. Victor Hayes. And what's going on? Tommy. Her voice was very calm now. Dead calm. I need you to open the shop tomorrow. I might not be in. Where are you gonna be? Emily looked at the note in her hand. 11 words in a dead man's handwriting. I don't know yet, she said and hung up. She didn't sleep. She sat in his recliner in the dark with the jacket across her knees like a dog, and she went through the shoebox of receipts from his closet one by one, because a man who saves receipts is a man who leaves a trail. At 12:40 a.m. she found it. Not a receipt. A photograph stuck to the back of a 1979 invoice for a set of Timken bearings so old it had glued itself there with time. She peeled it off with a thumbnail, black and white, faded to brown at the edges. Two young men, maybe 25, sitting on the tailgate of a truck with the desert behind them. One of them she'd never seen before. Dark hair, wild grin, an arm slung around the other guy's shoulders. The other one was her grandfather. Emily stopped breathing, because she'd never seen a picture of him young. Not one, in 22 years. And here he was, and he was beautiful. And he was laughing, mouth wide open, head back, laughing at something the other kid said. And Emily had never once, not one single time in her whole life, seen William Carter laugh like that. He looked like a completely different human being. He was wearing the jacket. She turned it over with hands that had finally started to shake. On the back, in pencil, in handwriting, that was not her grandfather's Bill and Jack. Silver Creek 68. For it went bad. Emily read it once. Twice. For it went bad, she whispered, and underneath that, in a different pencil, pressed so hard the paper had dented, added, much later, by a hand she knew, by a hand that had signed her permission slips. I'm sorry, Ray. Emily sat in the dark for a long time. Then she got up, put the photograph in her pocket with the note, and did the thing she'd been circling all night without admitting it. She stood in front of the hall mirror, and she put on the jacket. It fit. That's what got her. That's the thing that finally broke her open at 1:15 in the morning, 9 days after she buried the only person who ever believed in her. Not the patch, not the money, not Ruth's deadbolt. It fit. Shoulders, sleeves, everything. Like it had been waiting. Emily looked at herself in her grandfather's hallway wearing a Hell's Angels patch, and her reflection said something she hadn't planned to say in a voice she barely recognized. Okay, Grandpa. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry, quick, like wiping down a workbench. Okay, I'll go find him. The Silver Creek Diner opens at 5:30 for the ranch crowd. Emily walked in at 5:40 wearing the jacket because she'd made a decision somewhere around 3 a.m., and the decision was this. He hid it for 50 years and it killed something in him. I'm not hiding anything. She had never seen a room do what that room did. Marta dropped a coffee pot, not spilled, dropped. It exploded on the tile. Two ranch hands at the counter turned around, and one of them stood up so fast his stool went over backwards. An old Walt Kimmel, 91 half blind, who had eaten breakfast in that booth every morning since Eisenhower looked up from his eggs at the patch on Emily Carter's back, and his fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and he said one word out loud into total silence, "Bill." Nobody moved. Emily turned around slowly. "No, Walt," she said. "Emily, Bill's granddaughter." Walt Kimmel's eyes were wet and enormous behind his glasses. "You're wearing his colors," he said. "His what?" "Oh, girl." Walt's hand came up to his mouth. "Oh, girl, what have you done?" The whole diner was standing now. Not one person had said a word. Marta was on her knees in broken glass and coffee, and she wasn't picking any of it up. She was just looking at Emily with her hands pressed flat against her chest. "Somebody," Emily said, and her voice carried because she made it carry, "somebody in this room is going to tell me what this is." Silence. 40 years he fixed your cars." Louder. 50. He fixed Marta's van for free for 6 years after Danny died. Don't you dare look away from me, Marta. I was there. I handed him the wrench. He plowed your driveways. He paid for Walt's roof. Walt started to cry. Nobody in that room had ever seen Walt Kimmel cry. "And every single one of you knew," Emily said. "Every one of you knew, and you let me bury him thinking he was a mechanic." A ranch hand named Cody said very quietly, "Miss Carter put the jacket in a bag." "Why?" "Because Jimmy Reyes has already texted somebody, that's why." Emily's stomach dropped. "Texted who?" And that's when the diner door opened. Everybody turned. It wasn't Victor Hayes. That would have been simple. It was Sheriff Dale Merrick, 61, hat in his hand, and the look on his face was not a cop look. It was the look of a man who had just gotten a phone call he'd been dreading for 30 years. "Emily," he said. "Sheriff, would you come outside with me, please?" "Am I under arrest?" "No." "Monsieur." "Then no." Merrick closed his eyes briefly. "Emily, please. You tell me right here." She spread her arms, and the patch turned with her, and Marta made a small sound. "In front of everybody, what is this jacket?" Sheriff Dale Merrick looked around that diner, at Walt crying into a napkin, at Marta on her knees in the glass, at two ranch hands staring at the floor like schoolboys. And then he said the sentence that ended the life Emily Carter had been living up to that moment. "That jacket," he said, "is the reason your grandfather went to prison in 1971. The floor did not open up. The room did not spin. Emily just heard a high, thin ringing and very far away her own voice saying, "That's not funny." "No," Merrick agreed, "it isn't. He was a mechanic. He was a lot of things. He never left this town. He never left this county. He didn't have a passport. She stopped. Her mouth was moving and nothing was coming out because she was doing math again. Bill Carter, born 1943. Emily's mother, born 1975. 28 years between them. And her whole life whenever anyone asked what he did before the shop. William Carter said, and she could hear him say it, "Oh, I was away for a while. I was away for a while." Emily grabbed the back of a booth. "How long?" she said. "Emily, how long was he away, Dale?" Sheriff Merrick put his hat back on. He looked older than he had 30 seconds ago. 6 years, he said. He came home in 77. He came home, and he never wrote again, and he never spoke to a single one of them again, and this whole town made a decision to let him be a mechanic. That's what we gave him. That was the deal. That was the kindness, Emily. For what? Emily's voice tore. 6 years for what? And Sheriff Dale Merrick, who had known Bill Carter for 40 years, who had carried his casket 9 days ago, who had a photograph on his own desk of himself at 19, with Bill's hand on his shoulder, said, "You need to ask Jack Reynolds that." Emily's hand went to her back pocket, to 11 words on lined paper. "You know that name," she said. "Everybody over 50 in this county knows that name. Where is he?" "Emily, no. Where is he?" "You listen to me." Merrick took one step closer and dropped his voice so low the diner had to strain. "Whatever you think is happening, you have no idea what you have on your back right now. That patch is not a souvenir. It's not a costume. Somebody earned that and somebody kept it. And the fact that it still exists after 50 years means your grandfather kept it for a reason. Men have died over less than what's stitched on that leather. Then tell me the reason. I don't know the reason. Merrick's control cracked 1 inch, and it was the most frightening thing Emily had ever seen. You think I never asked him? I asked him for 30 years, and every single time Bill Carter looked at me and said the same 8 words. Emily's throat closed. What 8 words? Sheriff Merrick's jaw worked. The day you need to know, you'll know, Shiti. Emily walked out of that diner into the parking lot at 6:02 in the morning, with the whole town watching through the window. Her truck was where she'd left it. There was a piece of paper under the wiper blade. She stood there for a second. Then she pulled it out. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a photograph, a printout, cheap ink, still faintly warm, printed within the last hour. It was a picture of her, taken through her grandfather's kitchen window. Last night, at the kitchen table, under the good light, with the jacket spread out in front of her, and across the bottom in blue ballpoint, in neat block capitals, last offer, $250,000, noon. Emily Carter looked at that photograph for a long moment. Then she looked up and turned in a slow circle at the empty street, at the dark storefronts, at Ruth Delgado's deadbolt 3 blocks away, and Walt crying in the diner behind her, and 40 years of a lie she'd been raised inside of. And Emily Carter did something nobody in Silver Creek had ever seen a Carter do. She smiled. She got in the truck. She put the photograph in the glove box evidence. She thought everything's evidence now. And she pulled the note out of her back pocket and read 11 words one more time. Then she said out loud, to a dead man, to $250,000, to a whole town that had lied to her for 22 years, nobody wanted this jacket. She turned the key. Let's go find out why. The truck was doing 60 before Emily Carter remembered she hadn't decided where she was going. Her phone lit up on the seat beside her. Tommy. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Em. His voice was wrong, high and thin like a kid's. Em, don't come to the shop. She took her foot off the gas. Why? Just don't. Let me clean it up first. Let me get it looking normal, and then you can... Tommy. She was already turning. What happened to my shop? He didn't say anything for 3 full seconds. Then he said, somebody came through the roll-up door last night, and Emily hung up on him and drove the last mile and a half at 80, and she did not remember 1 second of it afterward. Carter Automotive had a 2-bay roll-up door that her grandfather had rebuilt in 1996 and greased every spring, and it was lying folded in the middle of the floor like a beer can somebody stepped on. Emily got out of the truck and stood in the doorway of the only place on earth she'd ever felt safe and looked at it. Tool chest on its side. 40 years of drawers dumped. Sockets everywhere, thousands of them, spread across that concrete like spilled shot. The parts washer tipped. The filing cabinet, the beautiful, ugly olive green filing cabinet Bill Carter had bought at a school auction in 1983, pulled out into the middle of the bay with every drawer hanging open like a mouth. Tommy was standing in the middle of it, holding a push broom he clearly hadn't touched yet. I got here at 6, he said. Em, I swear to God, I got here at 6 and it was all ready. Don't sweep. What? Don't sweep? Emily's voice came out flat and strange. Don't touch anything. Put the broom down. He put the broom down. She walked the floor slow the way she'd walk a car with an intermittent noise. Not looking. Reading. Because a shop is a machine like anything else, and a machine tells you what happened to it if you shut up long enough to let it. Register's open, she said. Yeah. How much was in it? Tommy swallowed. 300 and some. Is it gone? No? Emily stopped walking. Say that again. It's still in there, Tommy said. All of it. I counted twice because I thought I was going crazy. Emily stood very still in the wreck of her grandfather's shop with $300 sitting untouched in an open register and felt the last soft part of her turn to something hard. They weren't robbing us, she said. Em, Tommy, look at this. She pointed at the floor with a shaking finger, and her voice was climbing, and she let it climb. Look at the sockets. Somebody dumped every drawer in that box on the floor. You know how long that takes. That's 10 minutes of work, in the dark, with a flashlight. Nobody does that for $300. Nobody does that for any money. They did that because they were looking for something flat. Tommy's face went the color of the concrete. Flat like what? Flat like paper. She was already at the filing cabinet. She went through it on her knees, and Tommy stood behind her, not knowing what to do with his hands. And after 4 minutes, Emily sat back on her heels and said, "It's all here. That's good, right?" "No." She was breathing hard. "Tommy, it's all here. Every work order since 1984. Every parts invoice, every tax return. They went through all of it drawer by drawer, and they didn't take one page." She looked up at him, which means they didn't find it. "Find what?" And Emily Carter opened her mouth to say, "I don't know," and stopped, because she did know. Not what it was, but where it wasn't. "Tommy," she said slowly, "where's the old ledger?" He blinked. "The what?" "The green ledger. The hardback one. He wrote in it every Friday night for 20 years, and he never let me touch it. And one time when I was 15, I picked it up to move it off the bench, and he grabbed my wrist so hard he left a mark, and then he apologized for an hour." Her heart was slamming. "Where is it?" Tommy turned in a circle. It's always on the shelf over the..." They both looked at the shelf over the bench. It was empty. Emily got up off the floor and stood there and said out loud in a voice she didn't recognize, "They took the ledger and left the money." Tommy said, "Em, I think we should call the sheriff." And Emily laughed a short, ugly bark of a laugh that scared them both. "Tommy," she said, "the sheriff already knows." Ruth Delgado didn't answer the front door. Emily knew she was in there. Ruth's Buick was in the carport. Ruth's TV was on, and Ruth Delgado had not left that house before 9 in the morning in 30 years. Emily knocked again. Then she stopped knocking and put her forehead against the door and said at a normal volume because she knew exactly how thin that door was, "Ruth, I'm going to stand here all day." "Nothing. Somebody broke into my shop last night." The TV shut off. They dumped the whole toolbox on the floor. They opened every drawer in Grandpa's filing cabinet. They left $300 in the register, and they took a green ledger. Emily's voice was cracking, and she didn't stop it. "Ruth, I've got nobody. There's nobody left. Every person who could have explained this to me is either dead or hiding behind a door." Silence. Long enough that Emily started to turn away. Then the deadbolt went back. Ruth Delgado had not slept. That was the first thing. She looked like she'd been sitting in a chair in the dark all night, which Emily would learn later was exactly what she'd been doing. "Take it off," Ruth said, "before you come in my house. Take it off." Emily took the jacket off. She folded it over her arm, and Ruth flinched anyway. The kitchen smelled like coffee nobody had drunk. Ruth sat down heavily and put both hands flat on the table, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. "You knew," Emily said. "Yes." "You knew he went to prison." "Yes." 22 years. Emily's throat closed. "I ate at this table. You did my hair for prom at that counter. And you knew." "Yes," Ruth said, and her chin came up, and there was something ferocious in it. "And I'd do it again." "Why?" "Because that's what he wanted." Ruth's hand came down on the table hard enough to jump the sugar bowl. "Because that man came home in 1977 with nothing. Nothing, Emily, no money, no family, 34 years old and a felony on him. And he asked this town for exactly one thing in 50 years. One thing. He asked us to let him be a mechanic." Her eyes were streaming and her voice didn't waver. "And this town said yes. That's the only decent thing Silver Creek ever did, and I'm not going to sit here and let you tell me it was a lie. He lied to me. He protected you." "From what?" And Ruth Delgado looked at the jacket folded over Emily's arm, and her face came apart. "From that," she whispered. Emily set the jacket on the table. Ruth recoiled like it was live. "Ruth," Emily's voice was very quiet now. "Who's Ray?" The clock on the wall ticked 11 times. Emily counted them. "Where did you hear that name?" Ruth said. Emily took the photograph out of her pocket and laid it on the table face down so the pencil showed. "Bill and Jack. Silver Creek 68. Before it went bad. I'm sorry, Ray." Ruth Delgado looked at that for about 2 seconds, and then she made a sound Emily had never heard a human being make. Not a scream, not a sob, something in between torn out of her, and she put both hands over her face and folded forward until her forehead touched the table. Emily was around the table with her arms around her before she decided to move. Ruth, I'm sorry. 30 years, Ruth said into the tablecloth. 30 years I asked that man and he never, not once, he took it into the ground with him. And now you. Ruth, who is Ray? Ruth. Delgado sat up. Her face was wrecked. Her voice was steady as a bell. Ramon Delgado. Oh, she said. My husband. Emily let go of her and sat down hard in the chair. You're 41 years I was married to him. Buried him in 2003. Ruth pulled the photograph across the table with one finger and turned it over and looked at two grinning kids on a tailgate in 1968, and something in her face just quit. He rode with them, Ray and Bill and Jack, before any of it, when they were nothing but three idiots with motorcycles. Ruth, your grandfather went to prison in 1971, Ruth said, and my husband did not. The refrigerator hummed. And I have spent every day since then, Ruth said, wondering which one of those two things was the crime. Emily couldn't speak. Ray drank, Ruth said matter of fact the way you'd say Ray was tall. From 71 until the day he died, Ray drank. Not happy drinking. The other kind. And every couple of years when he got low enough, he'd say the same thing to me. He'd say, I go in there, Ruthie. She was looking at the wall. And I'd say, let who go and where, and he'd cry, and in the morning he wouldn't remember, and I wasn't allowed to ask. What did Grandpa go to prison for? I don't know. Ruth. I don't know. Ruth's hands came up. You think I didn't try Emily? I sat in this kitchen with William Carter every Sunday for 30 years, and I asked that man to his face maybe 50 times, and every single time he'd say the same thing. He'd say, Ruthie, Ray made a choice, and I made a choice, and both of us are still living with him, so let's talk about something else. That's not an answer. It's the only one he ever gave anybody. Emily put her head in her hands. There's a man named Victor Hayes, she said, and Ruth Delgado went absolutely still. Emily looked up. You know him. I know the name. He came to Grandpa's house last night. He knew I found the jacket. He knew what room I was in, Ruth. He knew it was on the kitchen table under the dish towel. Emily's voice was rising. He offered me $5,000 for it, then 10, then 25. Then he offered me $250,000 in a piece of paper saying I never saw it. Ruth's coffee cup was shaking in her hand. She set it down. Say the number again, she said. $250,000. For a jacket. For a jacket. Ruth Delgado sat in her kitchen and stared at nothing. Then she said, Oh, dear God, it's still alive. What is... Emily, listen to me. Ruth grabbed her wrist across the table and her grip was iron. A man does not pay $250,000 for a memory. A man pays $250,000 for a thing, something that exists, something that has his name on it or his father's name on it, and that jacket is where your grandfather kept it, and that means Bill Carter has been sitting on it for 50 years. Sitting on what? On whatever put him in prison. Ruth's eyes were burning. Child, don't you understand? Men like that don't get scared of the past. The past can't hurt them. They get scared of paper. And Emily said very slowly, they took his ledger. Ruth's hand went to her mouth. Emily's phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line of text. 11:14. You have 46 minutes. V. Emily looked at it for a long moment. Then she typed back 4 letters with her thumb and hit send and put the phone face down on Ruth Delgado's table. Noon, Ruth said, What did you tell him? I told him to come at noon, Emily said, standing up and picking up the jacket, because I want to see his face. They came at 12:04, which Emily understood immediately was on purpose. 4 minutes late is a message. 4 minutes late says I decide when things happen. There were 3 of them. Victor Hayes in the same charcoal quarter zip, a woman in a suit with a leather folder. And trailing behind them like a bush that knew it had done something, Dale Whitaker of Whitaker Realty, 40 years in Silver Creek, who had sold Emily's grandfather this very lot in 1984. Emily was standing in her destroyed shop with her arms crossed wearing the jacket, and Tommy was behind her holding a torque wrench for no reason at all. Victor Hayes looked at the wreckage. He looked at the folded roll-up door. He looked at 10,000 sockets on the floor. And he said, My God, Emily, when did this happen? He said it perfectly. That was the thing. If she hadn't been watching for it, if she hadn't spent 9 days learning that everyone she'd ever trusted was a very good actor, she'd have believed him. Last night, Emily said, Did they take much? They didn't take any money. Hayes frowned. It was a beautiful frown. That's strange. Isn't it? Emily said. The woman in the suit stepped forward. Ms. Carter, my name is Denise Aguilar. I represent Hayes Development. I know what you are, and I have documents for you. She opened the folder. There's a purchase agreement for the personal property item we discussed at the agreed figure. There's a mutual non-disclosure, and there's a separate offer entirely unrelated for the real property at 400 East Mesa Road. Emily didn't take the folder. How much for the shop? $810,000, Aguilar said. Tommy made a small noise. Emily didn't move. This lot is worth $2. It's worth what someone will pay. Then somebody's paying $1 million too much and it's not for the dirt. Emily turned to Hayes. You've got a real problem, but you know that. Hayes tilted his head, pleasant. What's that? You keep offering me too much money, Emily said. Yeah, Mom. Every time you open your mouth, you tell me something's worth more than I thought. If you'd offered me $800 for the jacket, I'd have taken it in about 4 seconds and gone home and cried. She stepped closer. But you offered me $250,000 at 6 o'clock at night on a porch 9 days after we put him into the ground. You didn't even wait for the casseroles to stop coming. Something moved across Victor Hayes' face. You want to know what that tells me? Emily said. It tells me you're on a clock, and I don't know what the clock is. But I know a man who's got time doesn't behave like you. Denise Aguilar said quietly, Victor. Be quiet, Hayes said without looking at her. And that more than the money, more than the Range Rover, more than any of it was when Emily knew she had him. Because a man in control does not tell his lawyer to be quiet in front of the person he's negotiating with. Dale, Emily said. Dale Whitaker jumped like he'd been shot. Emily, look at me. Honey, I've known you since. Look at me, Dale. He looked at her. 67 years old, sunburned, a good man in every way that never got tested until it did. Who owns this lot? Emily said. Whitaker's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Dale, you sold it to him in '84. You did the paperwork. Who owns this lot? You do, Whitaker said. You and the estate and bio. And Dale Whitaker looked at Victor Hayes. That was it. That was the whole thing. He looked at Victor Hayes for permission to answer a question about Emily Carter's own property, and Emily saw him do it, and something in her went very cold and very quiet and very clear. Get out, she said. Emily, get out of my shop. She said it almost gently. All 3 of you, right now. Denise Aguilar closed her folder. Dale Whitaker was already backing toward the door, and he was crying, actually crying, and Emily didn't care even a little. Victor Hayes didn't move. Emily, he said, can I say one thing? No. Your grandfather said no to my father. Hayes said in 1970. Emily froze. He was 27 years old. Hayes went on conversational. Unhurried, and every hair on Emily's arm stood straight up. He was the toughest man in this county, and he had 100 friends in a chapter behind him, and he said no. And I want you to understand something, because I don't think anybody's going to tell you the truth this week except me. He glanced around the ruined shop. That was 56 years ago, and look where you're standing. Emily's mouth was dry as sand. Get out, she whispered. He said no, Victor Hayes said, and he spent 6 years in Florence, and he came home and fixed cars, and he died in a house worth $90,000 with one photograph on the wall. He pulled the door open. That's what saying no bought him. I'm offering you a better deal than he ever got. The door shut. Emily stood in the middle of the floor for maybe 10 seconds. Then she said, Tommy? Yeah. He sounded like he might throw up. He knew the year. What? He said 1970. And Merrick said Grandpa went in 71. Emily turned around. Tommy, he wasn't born. Victor Hayes wasn't born yet. How does a man know the year his daddy had a conversation with a mechanic 56 years ago? Tommy stared at her. Because somebody told him, Emily said. Because it's the story he grew up on. Because in the Hayes house, my grandfather's name gets said. She started for the filing cabinet. What are you doing? He said the deed. Emily was already pulling drawers. He said 400 East Mesa Road. He said the real property, and Dale Whitaker looked at him before he'd answer me about my own dirt, and I want to know why. We went through all of it. We went through the files. She hauled the bottom drawer all the way out and dumped it, and Tommy jumped. We didn't go through the box. The box was the shoebox, the one from the closet. She'd brought it with her because she'd stopped letting it out of her sight sometime around midnight, and she sat down on the concrete floor of her wrecked shop and went through 1984 receipt by receipt with her hands going faster and faster, and Tommy crouched down next to her and started handing her papers. It took 11 minutes. Here, Tommy said. Emily took it. It wasn't a receipt. It was a photocopy of a warranty deed, Yavapai County, dated March of 1984, folded into eighths and softened at the creases like a thing that had been unfolded and refolded 100 times over 40 years. Grantee William R. Carter. An unmarried man as to an undivided one-half interest, and Emily's eyes stopped. Tommy said, what's it say? She couldn't answer. M. And John A. Reynolds, an unmarried man as to an undivided one-half interest. Emily, what does it say? Emily Carter looked up from the floor of her grandfather's shop with her face gone completely white and said, Jack Reynolds owns half of this building. Tommy said, that's not funny. He's owned half of it since 1984. Emily's hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. Tommy, that's why. That's why Whitaker looked at Hayes. That's why they can't just buy this lot. They can't buy it. They can't ever buy it because they'd have to find... She stopped, and then she started laughing. It came up out of her from someplace underneath, the grief, big, helpless, whooping laughter, and she sat on the concrete in a Hell's Angels jacket and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. You're scaring me. He did it on purpose, Emily gasped. Tommy, don't you see it? He didn't need the money in '84. He had the money. He could have bought this lot outright. He put Jack Reynolds on the deed on purpose. For 42 years, he sat right here and let this town think he was a mechanic, and the whole time this building had a lock on it. She held the paper up. This is a gate. He built a gate, and he handed the key to a man he hadn't spoken to since 1977. Tommy sat back on his heels. He said carefully, why would he hand it to a guy he never talked to? And Emily's laughter stopped like somebody cut a wire. Because he wasn't guarding the shop, she said. Then what was he guarding? She looked at the empty shelf over the bench where a green ledger had sat for 20 years. Something worth $250,000, Emily said quietly, to a man who's never seen it. Walt Kimmel's daughter didn't want to let her in. He's 91, she said through the screen. He cried all morning. Whatever you did to him in that diner. Diane, please. He didn't sleep, Emily. Neither did I. From somewhere behind her, a voice like a rusty hinge said, Diane. Let her in or I'll get up. Diane let her in. Walt Kimmel was in a recliner with a blanket over his legs, and his eyes went to the jacket over Emily's arm and stayed there. You still got it, he said. I've still got it. Somebody offered to buy it yet. Emily stopped breathing. How did you... Ha! Walt's mouth twisted. Sit down, girl. She sat. I've known your grandfather since 1962, Walt said. I was 30. He was 19, and he was the worst-behaved human being in Yavapai County, and I mean that as a compliment. He wheezed a laugh. And I'm going to tell you something I've never told anybody, and then I'm going to tell you to go away, and I want you to do it. Walt? In 1976, Walt said, a man came to my house. Emily went still. Bill was still inside, year to go, and this fella comes to my door in a suit, and he sits in that chair, that one right there where you're sitting, and he asked me real polite whether Bill Carter ever left anything with me. Walt's hands were folded on the blanket, and they were perfectly steady. And I said no, and he said, are you sure? And I said yes. And he said, Mr. Kimmel, you've got a hardware store on Main Street. Emily's stomach turned over. 6 months later, my supplier out of Phoenix stopped taking my calls. Walt shrugged one shoulder. Just stopped. 40 years of business. No reason given. I was closed in a year and a half. Walt, I ain't finished. He looked at her. In 1985, Bill Carter walks in my house. He's been out 8 years by then, got the shop, got a life, and he sets an envelope on my kitchen table and walks out without a word. $11,000 cash. Walt's voice finally cracked a hairline. He never mentioned it. Not once. Not in 40 years. He fixed my truck for free until the day he died, and he never brought it up, and if I tried to, he'd start talking about the weather. Emily's eyes were streaming, and she didn't wipe them. Now you listen to me, Walt said. That man in the suit, in my chair in 1976. Arthur Hayes, Emily whispered. Arthur Hayes. Walt nodded slowly. And you know what he asked me? He didn't ask if Bill hid money. He didn't ask about a bike or a gun or a stash or any of the things you'd think. Walt leaned forward, and his old hand came out and grabbed her wrist, and his grip was terrible. He asked me if Bill Carter ever left anything with a date on it. The room went absolutely silent. Girl, Walt said, they've been hunting a piece of paper for 50 years. Emily couldn't move. And they never found it, Walt said, and his eyes were wet and shining, and something like joyful because Bill Carter was the stubbornest son of a bitch that ever drew breath in this state. And he took 6 years in Florence rather than give it up. And he came home, and he sat in that shop for 42 years, and he smiled at them. Emily's voice came out in pieces. Walt, where is it? I don't know. Walt? I don't know, girl, and thank God, because if I did, they'd have had it out of me in a week. He let go of her wrist. But I know who does. Emily's whole body went rigid. Jack Reynolds, she said. Jack Reynolds. Walt, where is he? And Walt Kimmel looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and Emily could see him doing it, could see a 91-year-old man weighing 40 years of a promise against a girl in a dead man's jacket. There's a place, he said, out past the county line on the old highway. 40 minutes. Used to be called the Iron Horse. Don't know what they call it now. His jaw worked. Second Saturday of the month the old ones come in. Not the kids, the old ones. Emily was already standing. Emily, Walt's voice stopped her at the door. Today's the second Saturday. She turned around. I know, he said. I checked this morning, before I decided whether to tell you. He shut his eyes. God forgive me. Sheriff Merrick's cruiser was parked across the mouth of her driveway when she came back for the truck. He got out and stood there with his thumbs in his belt. Don't do it, he said. You following me? I've been sitting here 2 hours because I figured out where you'd end up. He looked exhausted. Walt call you. I called Walt. Jesus. Merrick rubbed his face. Emily, that place, those men, you don't understand what you're walking into. There is a protocol. Then tell me the protocol. You can't wear it, Merrick said flatly. That's the protocol. Nobody wears that patch who didn't earn it. Nobody. That is the one law that has never bent, not one time, not in 70 years. And you are going to walk into a room full of men who have gone to prison over it, wearing it on your back like a souvenir. He gave it to me. He hid it from you. Emily's voice went up so loud it cracked. He left a note, Dale. He left a note that said, Find Jack, Merrick shouted back. It didn't say wear his colors into a bar. They stood there breathing at each other on a residential street in Silver Creek, Arizona at 4 p.m. Then Emily said quietly, Why do you care? Merrick's face changed. You've got a picture on your desk, she said. You, 19, skinny, and a hand on your shoulder. Dale Merrick looked at the ground. 1984, he said. I was 19 and I was going bad. I was going real bad. Emily and I got picked up with a lot of something in my trunk, and the man who owned the shop I swept up at came down to that station and stood in front of my father and said, Give the boy to me. His voice had gone rough as gravel. And my father did. And Bill Carter worked me 80 hours a week for 2 years and never let me quit and never told one living soul, and I am wearing this badge because of it. Emily's eyes burned. Then help me, she said. I am helping you. He kept a piece of paper for 50 years, Dale. She stepped up to the cruiser. 50 years. He went to prison instead of handing it over. He sat in that shop and let this whole town think he was nobody. He put a name on his deed to lock the door. And 9 days after he dies, a man shows up on his porch with $250,000 and a photograph of me taken through a window. Her voice broke wide open. Dale, if I don't go tonight, if I hand this jacket over, then everything he swallowed for 55 years was for nothing, and he did it alone, and I'm the last person alive who can make it mean something. Merrick didn't say anything for a long time. Then he opened his cruiser door. Take the 89, he said without looking at her. There's a cell dead zone past the mile 42 marker. If you're going to call anybody, call them before that. Emily's throat locked. Dale and Emily, he paused half in the car. When you walk in there, whatever happens, don't take it off and don't explain yourself, and for God's sake, don't apologize. Why not? Sheriff Dale Merrick looked at her over the roof of his car, with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Because he wouldn't have, he said. Tommy tried to get in the truck. No, Emily said. Tommy, no. You can't go alone. You've got a mother, Emily said, and that shut him up like a slap. You've got a mother and two sisters and you're 23 years old and you work for me and I'm telling you to go home. He stood there in the driveway with his fists balled up. That's not fair, he said, and his voice broke on it. No, Emily agreed. It isn't. She drove out on the 89 with the sun going down on her left and the jacket on her back. And at the mile 42 marker, her phone lost signal exactly like Merrick said it would, and she was completely perfectly alone for the first time in her life. She talked to him the whole way. So this is the part where you tell me I'm rushing it, she said. Right? The part that's rushed is the part that fails. The road unrolled. Except you had 55-year-old man and you didn't do a damn thing with it. So maybe rushing's not the worst thing a person can do. 20 miles of nothing. You should have told me. Her voice cracked alone at 70 miles an hour. You should have told me. I would have been proud of you. That's the part you got wrong. That's the part you got so wrong I could scream. You thought I'd look at you different. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. You were right. I do. You're the bravest person I ever met, and I never knew, and now you're dead, and I can't tell you. The dashboard clock said 7:48. Okay, Emily said. At 8:03, she came around a long curve, and there it was, a low cinder block building with no sign at all, where a sign used to be in a gravel lot. And in that lot, in two long rows, more motorcycles than Emily Carter had ever seen in one place in her life. She counted them because counting kept her hands from shaking. 41. She parked her grandfather's truck at the far edge and sat in it with the engine off for 4 minutes. Then she took the note out of her pocket and read 11 words for maybe the 100th time and put it back and got out. The gravel was loud. The music inside was loud. Her hand was on the door. Don't take it off. Don't explain yourself. Don't apologize. Okay, Grandpa, Emily Carter said, and she pushed the door open and walked into a room of 41 men wearing her grandfather's colors on her back. The jukebox kept playing. Everything else stopped. A pool cue stopped halfway through a stroke. A bottle stopped 6 inches from a mouth. Somewhere near the back, a chair scraped once, and then absolute silence. Not the silence of a room that's surprised, but the silence of a room that has gone from noise to readiness in under a second. 41, heads turning and not one man moving. Emily stood in the doorway with her chin up and her hands empty. And a bartender with a gray ponytail and 40 years of tattoos put down the glass he was holding very slowly and said in a voice that carried into every corner of that dead silent room, "Nobody move." Nobody moved. Emily Carter stood in that doorway with 41 men looking at her back and understood in a way she had never understood anything, that she had exactly one move, and it was to not make one. The bartender came out from behind the bar. He was 60-something and built like a piece of farm equipment, and he crossed that floor without hurrying, and every man he passed stayed exactly where he was, which told Emily more about who he was than a name would have. He stopped 6 feet from her. "Turn around," he said. "No." Something went through the room. Not a sound, a pressure change. "Say that again," the bartender said. "I said no." Emily's voice did not shake, and she would never know how. "You already saw it. Everybody in here saw it before I got 2 steps in. You don't need me to turn around, you need me to do what you said, and I'm not doing that." The bartender looked at her for a long 5 seconds. Then he said, "Whose is it?" "Mine." "Girl, it's on my back," Emily said. "That makes it mine. You want to talk about who it was, that's a different conversation, and I'll have it, but I'm not going to stand in a doorway and pretend I stole this." A voice from somewhere in the middle of the room said quiet, "Fitz." The bartender didn't turn. "I know." Fitz looked at her face. "I'm looking." Emily's heart was going so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "What's your name?" Fitz said. "Emily Carter." In that room, 41 men, a jukebox playing something from 1974, a pool table with 3 balls left on it. That room made a sound like the air going out of a tire. Somebody said, "Carter." Somebody else said, "Carter." And way in the back, a man Emily couldn't see said in a voice that had gone completely hollow, "Bill's kid, granddaughter," Emily said. Fitz closed his eyes. He stood there in the middle of his own bar with his eyes shut, and Emily watched a man in his 60s do arithmetic he'd apparently been avoiding for a very long time. He's dead, Fitz said. It wasn't a question. 9 days ago. How? Pancreatic cancer. He knew for 8 months. He didn't tell me. Emily's voice finally went just a little, and she hated it, and she let it happen. He didn't tell anybody. Fitz opened his eyes and they were wet. Course he didn't, he said. He turned around and he said to a room that was already listening harder than any room Emily had ever been in, Bill Carter died. Nobody said anything. Then a chair went over. Not thrown. A man had simply stood up too fast somewhere near the pool table, and he was maybe 70, and he had a beard down to his chest, and he was staring at Emily's back like it was a ghost. And he said, when? 9 days, Fitz said. 9. The man's face came apart. 9 days, and nobody? He looked around the room wild. Nobody called. Who was going to call Deacon? Fitz said, and it came out savage. Who exactly was going to call? And the man called Deacon put a hand on the pool table to hold himself up, and he said to nobody, 50 years, and I never, and then he couldn't finish it, and a man next to him put a hand on his shoulder. And that was the moment Emily Carter realized she had not walked into a room of dangerous strangers. She'd walked into a wake for a man they hadn't been allowed to mourn. Fitz took her by the elbow, not rough. Careful the way you move something you're afraid of breaking. Come off the door, he said. Why? Because you're standing in a doorway wearing that patch, and there's a parking lot behind you, Fitz said. And I have spent 30 years keeping this place quiet, and I would like to keep it quiet for one more night. Emily came off the door. He put her at the end of the bar. He put a glass of water in front of her, which she did not ask for and did not drink, and he stood across from her with both hands flat on the wood. Take it off, he said. Everybody keeps saying that. I'll bet they do. My grandmother's neighbor said it. A sheriff said it. A man offered me $250,000 to say it. Emily met his eyes. I'm not taking it off. Fitz went very, very still. Say the number again. $250,000. The bar behind her had gone quiet again, and it was a different quiet now. Who? Fitz said. Victor Hayes. And Fitz's hands came off the bar. He backed up a step. He put a hand over his mouth and turned around all the way around and stood with his back to her for about 4 seconds, and then he turned back, and he was a different man. Something had come off of him. Something had come on. Hayes, he said. You know that name. Girl. Fitz's voice was shaking. Girl. Fitz, a voice from behind her. Deacon closed now, and there were others with him, and Emily made herself not turn around. Fitz, don't. She said the name in my bar, Deacon. Fitz. She said Hayes in my bar. Fitz's fist came down on the wood, and every glass on it jumped. 55 years, and a Carter walks in here and says Hayes. Emily said quietly, somebody tell me why that's a big deal. Nobody said anything. She turned around then. Slow, and she looked at maybe 15 men who had drifted up behind her without a sound, gray and bald and bearded and enormous. And every single one of them was looking at her like she was a wire that was live. Somebody, Emily said, in this room, tell me why that's a big deal. And Deacon said, because we swore we'd never say it. Why what? Any of it. His voice was wrecked. That's the deal. That's what he bought. Girl, we don't say Hayes. We don't say 71. We don't say your grandfather's name. You've been sitting in a bar for 50 years not saying his name. Yes, Deacon shouted. The word bounced off the ceiling. Yes, he said again, and his chest was heaving. Because that's what he told us to do, and he had the right to tell us, and we did it, and I have not spoken that man's name out loud since 1977, and I loved him more than my own brother, and you're standing here in his colors asking me why it's a big deal. Emily's eyes were streaming. Then say it now, she said. What? Say his name, right now. He's dead. He's been dead 9 days, and I buried him by myself with 200 people who thought he fixed cars. Her voice tore apart in the middle. Say his name. The room did not breathe, and Deacon, 70 years old, 3 feet away, shaking, said, Bill Carter. And then he said it again louder. And then somebody in the back said it, and somebody else. And it went around that room like a fuse, burning 41 men, saying a name they'd swallowed for half a century, and it turned into something Emily could not name. Not a chant, not a cheer, just a noise. a low rolling thing that got into her sternum and stayed there. Emily Carter stood in the middle of it with her grandfather on her back, and finally, 9 days late, in a bar full of strangers, she put her hands over her face and cried. Fitz let it go for about a minute, then he said enough, and it stopped like a switch. Emily wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry, quick. Sit down, Fitz said. I'm looking for Jack Reynolds. I know what you're doing here. Then sit down, Emily. She sat down. Fitz leaned over the bar. You listen to me now, he said, because I'm only doing this once. Whatever you've got in your head about how tonight goes, throw it out. You don't get to walk in here and pull a string and have the whole thing come apart the way you want it to. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? You wait, Fitz said. You sit on that stool and you wait and you don't touch anybody and you don't ask anybody's name, and when he comes through that door, you let him speak first. Emily's heart stopped. He's coming here. Fitz didn't answer. Fitz. She was on her feet. Is he coming here? Sit down. Is he coming here? And Fitz said, he's been here 2 hours. Emily turned around. Every man in that bar was looking at the same door. A door at the back past the pool table that Emily had walked past without seeing because she had been busy being terrified. He's in the back, Fitz said. He's been in the back since 6. And I called him the second you walked in, and I said, Jack, there's a girl out here in Bill's colors, and you know what he said to me? Emily couldn't speak. He didn't say anything. Fitz's jaw was working. He didn't say one word. He's been sitting back there for 4 minutes, not saying anything, and that man has not gone 4 minutes without talking since 1963. The door opened. Emily Carter had built a picture in her head over 18 hours. Everybody does. She'd built a giant 6'5" shoulders, like a door, some kind of storm on legs. The man who came out of that back room was 5'10", and he walked with a limp. Silver hair tied back, gray beard down to his collarbone. 58 years old and every one of them showing. And he came out of that room and stopped about 15 feet away and just looked at her. Nobody in that bar moved. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that it got unbearable, long enough that Emily started to open her mouth, and Fitz said very quietly, don't. So she didn't, and Jack Reynolds looked at Emily Carter's face for 11 full seconds, and then his eyes went past her to her shoulder, to the edge of black leather he could just see, and everything in him changed at once. Turn around, he said. Emily said, I've been telling people no all night. And Jack Reynolds said, I know, turn around anyway. She turned around. She heard him take one step, then stop. The silence went on so long she thought something had gone wrong. Then behind her, very quietly, Jack Reynolds said, that's not his. Emily's whole body went cold. She turned back around. What? That jacket? Jack's voice was absolutely level. It's not Bill's. It was in his closet. I know where it was. It's got his stitch in it. I know his stitch. There's a hand repair on the left shoulder, and I've seen him sew like that 100. That's his stitch, Jack agreed. That's his sewing. That's not his jacket. Emily's mouth was open. Whose is it? She said. And Jack Reynolds' legend, ghost the name in 11 words, in a dead man's handwriting, said mine. The room made a sound. Emily grabbed the bar to stay upright. That's not. 54 inches, Jack said. Long body. It's cut for a man 5'10" with long arms. Your grandfather was 6'2", and he had a chest on him like a barrel, and that jacket would not have gone around him at 25 years old, let alone 40. He hadn't moved. He sewed that shoulder for me in 1969 because I laid it down outside Kingman, and he wouldn't let me pay a guy to do it. Then why was it in his closet? Emily's voice was rising. Why was it in his closet in a bag for 50 years? Because I gave it to him, Jack said. Wiped him on us. And Jack Reynolds said, so he'd have something to hold over me. Emily stared at him. I don't understand, she said. No, Jack said. You don't. He came the rest of the way to the bar. He sat down 2 stools away, not next to her, 2 away, and Emily understood somehow that this was deliberate, and Fitz put a glass in front of him without being asked, and Jack didn't touch it. Say it, Jack said without looking at her. Say what? Whatever you drove out here to say. Say it now, because in about an hour I'm going to stop being able to hear it. Emily's hands were shaking. She put them flat on the bar. He left a note, she said. Jack closed his eyes. In the lining, Emily said. Sewed into the hem, 11 words. She got it out of her pocket. She unfolded it. She slid it 2 stools down the bar with one finger and pulled her hand back. Jack Reynolds looked at that piece of paper for a long time before he picked it up. Emily watched him read it. She watched a 58-year-old man read 11 words and turn into something she'd only ever seen once the day she was 4, and a man opened a door and found a kid with a garbage bag. If you ever find this jacket, find Jack Reynolds. He will tell you the truth about who I really was. Jack put it down. He said, that son of a bitch. Jack, that son of a bitch. And he laughed a broken, terrible sound. 50 years, he wouldn't say a word to me. Wouldn't take a call. I sat outside his shop in '89 for 6 hours, Emily. I sat in the lot, and he looked right at me through the window and went back under a car. Jack's voice went up and cracked. And now he's dead, and he sends me a note. He didn't send it to you, Emily said. He sent it to me. Jack stopped. He sent it to me, Emily said, and her voice was steadying. And it's about you, and I want to know why a man who wouldn't speak to you for 50 years spent his last 8 months making sure I'd find your name. Jack Reynolds turned on the stool and looked at her for the first time straight on. Because he needed me to do the one thing he couldn't, he said, which is what? Tell you, Jack said, and be the one you hate for it. Emily's throat closed. Tell me what? And Jack Reynolds said, he didn't do it. The bar was silent. Fitz had his hands flat on the wood and his head down. Deacon was standing behind Emily's shoulder, and she could hear him breathing. He didn't do what? Emily whispered. Whatever they told you he went in for. Emily's mouth moved. Nothing came out. Then, 6 years. Florence, 1971 to 77. 6 years, Florence, 71 to 77, Jack agreed. For what? Aggravated assault and possession with intent, Jack said. 2 counts, pled out. Wouldn't testify, wouldn't name anybody, wouldn't take the deal they kept shoving at him. He picked up the glass finally and put it back down without drinking. Everybody in this bar knows that. And he didn't do it. No. Then who did? And Jack Reynolds said, I did. The floor came out from under her. No, Emily said. Emily. No. She was off the stool. No, that's your no. You didn't. You're lying. Why would you? Sit down. He went to prison for you. Her voice was a shriek, and she didn't care. He was 27 years old, and he was to prison for 6 years for you. Emily, sit down. I will not sit down. She was crying and screaming at the same time, and 40 men were watching, and she did not care about a single one of them. You took 6 years of his life. I was 23, Jack roared. The whole bar flinched, and Jack Reynolds put his face in his hands right there in front of everybody. I was 23, he said into his palms, and I was stupid, and I was high, and I put a man in the hospital who did not deserve it, and there was 11 pounds of something in my saddlebags, and I was looking at 15 to life because I already had 2, and Bill Carter had nothing. Clean. 27 and clean. He dropped his hands, and his face was ruined. And he walked into that station at 4 a.m, and he said it was me, and there wasn't one thing on God's earth I could do about it. Emily was shaking so hard she had to hold the bar. You let him, she said. I didn't let him. You let him. I was in a room down the hall, Jack shouted. I was in handcuffs down the hall. Emily, and by the time I got out, they had it signed, and he wouldn't look at me. And I stood in that hallway and I screamed at him until they dragged me out, and he never looked at me. Emily's legs went. Deacon caught her elbow. She shook him off and stood up on her own. Why, she said. Jack didn't answer. Wait him. She was in his face now, 2 feet away, and 40 men who could have broken her in half did not move an inch. Why would he do that? You weren't his brother. You weren't his blood. You were a 23-year-old idiot. Because of Ray, Jack said. Everything stopped. Emily's whole body went cold from the scalp down. What did you say? She whispered. Ray Delgado, Jack said. Say it again. Ray Delgado was in the room, Jack said. That's what nobody's told you. That's what nobody in this bar is going to tell you because half of them don't know, and the other half wish they didn't. He was looking at her, and his eyes were terrible. There were 3 of us that night, me, Ray, and your grandfather. And when it went bad, 2 of us had priors, and 1 of us had a wife who was 5 months pregnant. Emily could not breathe. Ruth, she said. Ruth Delgado. Jack said. Sitting in a house in Silver Creek with a baby coming married to a man who was looking at 10 years minimum. No, and Bill Carter did the math, Jack said, in about 4 seconds at 4 o'clock in the morning, standing in a parking lot with two men who were both going away, and he said, I'll take it. Emily's hand was over her mouth. He said, Jack, you're too dumb to survive it. Ray, you got a kid coming. Jack's voice had gone to gravel. And Ray Delgado. God forgive him. God forgive all of us. Ray Delgado said, okay. The bar was absolutely silent. He said, okay, Jack repeated, wondering 55 years later, like he still couldn't get it down. And he went home to his wife, and I went home, and Bill went to Florence. Emily sat down on the stool because there was nothing else to do. Ruth, she said, Ruth doesn't know. Ruth doesn't know. She's been sitting in that house for 50 years thinking her husband was a coward. Ruth Delgado, Jack said, has 4 sons, and every one of them had a father in the house. And that's what Bill bought, and he never sent her the bill. And if you want to hate somebody tonight, hate me because I've been alive 55 years knowing that, and I never told her either. Emily put her head down on the bar and could not stop shaking. Nobody touched her. After a while, Fitz put a hand near hers on the wood. Not on it, near it. She sat up. Say the rest, she said. Emily, there's more. Her voice was destroyed and steady. That's not all of it. A man doesn't pay $250,000 because his daddy's name is in an old prison story. Say the rest. Jack Reynolds looked at her. Then he said, Fitz, clear the room. And Fitz said, Jack, clear the room. It took 90 seconds. 40 men filed out into a gravel lot without one word of complaint, and Deacon was the last, and he stopped in the doorway and looked back at Emily and said, Girl, I'm sorry. And then it was Emily and Jack and Fitz, and a jukebox nobody had thought to unplug. Jack said, Did you find the ledger? Emily's head came up. How do you know about the ledger? Did you find it? It's gone. She was on her feet again. Somebody kicked in my shop last night and dumped every drawer and left $300 in the register and took a green ledger off a shelf. What's in the ledger, Jack? And Jack Reynolds put his hands over his face and said, Oh no. What's in the ledger? Nothing, Jack said. Don't. Nothing, Emily. He looked up. That's the point. That's the whole point. There's nothing in that ledger but 40 years of oil changes and a man's handwriting, and he left it sitting on an open shelf in an unlocked shop for 4 decades where any fool could walk in and take it. Emily's mind went white. It's a decoy, she said. It's a decoy, Jack said. He left them a decoy. He left them a decoy for 42 years, Jack said, and they finally took it, and the second they open it, they're going to know they've been played. And Emily, his voice went up urgent, real fear in it for the first time all night. How long ago did they take it? Emily looked at the clock over the bar. 21 hours, she said. Jack Reynolds went gray. Then they already know, he said. Jack, they already know it's junk, and that means they already know it's somewhere else, and that means the next place they go is the house. I locked the house. Emily, Jack grabbed her arm. They came to the shop while you were asleep, and Emily Carter's blood turned to ice water in her body. Fitz, Jack said, phone. There's no signal out here. I know there's no signal. Get me the landline. Emily said, Jack, what's in the house? What did he keep? Tell me what I'm looking for. Jack was already moving. I don't know. You don't know. He never told me, Jack whirled around. He never told anybody. That's why it survived, Emily. That's the whole reason it survived 55 years. Arthur Hayes tore up every friend Bill ever had. He broke Walt Kimmel's store. He got 2 men fired. He had a guy sit outside Ruth's house for a month in '76. Jack's face was working, and he never found it because there was never anybody to tell. Bill Carter put it somewhere, and then he shut his mouth for 55 years, and he died with it. Then why the note? Emily screamed. Why send me to you if you don't know? And Jack Reynolds stopped dead. He stopped, and his mouth opened, and Emily watched something arrive behind his eyes. Say that again, he said. Why would he send me to you if you don't? No, the note. Jack was already lunging for it, snatching it off the bar. Read it, out loud, every word. Emily's voice shook. If you ever find this jacket, find Jack Reynolds. He will tell you the truth about who I really was. Jack read it, then he read it again. Then he said, Fitz. Yeah. Fitz, look at the second line. Fitz came around the bar and looked over his shoulder, and Emily watched two old men read 11 words, and she watched Fitz's face go slack. "Oh my God," Fitz said. "What?" Emily grabbed at the paper. "What? Who I really was," Jack said. "Yeah, so." "Emily." Jack turned the paper around. His finger was on the ink and it was trembling. "Your grandfather wrote parts orders for 40 years. He wrote in a ledger every Friday night for 2 decades. That man's grammar was perfect. He'd correct me. He'd correct me at 19 years old for saying ain't. Jack, I don't." "Then why?" Jack said, "does that say who I really was?" And Emily saw it. She saw it, and the whole room went sideways. "Instead of who I really am," she whispered. "He wrote it in past tense," Jack said. "About himself, while he was alive." Emily's hands were over her mouth. "He wrote it," she said, "about a name." Fitz said, "Jesus Christ." "He had another name," Emily said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. Jack, he had another name, didn't he? He had a name before Silver Creek." "William Carter," Jack said slowly, "is not the name he was born with." Emily grabbed the bar. "Then what is?" she said. And Jack Reynolds said, "I have no idea." "You rode with him." "For 9 years," Jack shouted. 9 years, and he never once talked about before. And I never asked, because that's the whole point, Emily. That's what the life was. Nobody asked. That's why people came. He stopped. He put both hands on the bar. He said very quietly, "And I was 23, and I thought that was cool." The jukebox clicked over to a new song. "He wasn't hiding from the law," Emily said. "He went to prison. Nobody hides from the law by going to prison for 6 years under a fake name. They'd have printed him. They'd have..." And she stopped. Because Jack Reynolds was looking at her and he was nodding slowly and his eyes had gone very bright. "They printed him," Jack said. "They printed him in 1971, Emily said, "under the name William Carter." "And nothing came back," Emily said. "And nothing came back," Jack said. "Which means the name was already clean by then." Emily's mind was going so fast it hurt. "Which means he didn't make it up in a parking lot at 4 in the morning than he had it. He'd had it for years. Since at least 62, Jack said. Walt Kimmel knew him in 62 as Carter. So sometime before 1962, Emily said, a man became William Carter. And whatever he was before that, Jack said, he brought a piece of it with him. Emily's hands were shaking so hard she couldn't hold the note. "Jack?" Her voice was almost nothing. "How old was Arthur Hayes in 1970? Jack blinked. "I don't, 50s, 55. So he was around before 62, too." "Emily." "Jack, listen to me." She was gripping his forearm now, and she didn't remember grabbing it. "Everybody's been telling me the same story all week. Bill said no to Arthur Hayes in 1970. Bill exposed him. Bill had paper on him. Everybody keeps telling me my grandfather found something on Hayes. That's what happened." "Then why," Emily said, "did Arthur Hayes come to Walt Kimmel's house in 1976, 5 years after Grandpa was already locked up, 5 years after there was nothing left to expose, and ask if Bill Carter ever left anything with a date on it?" Jack Reynolds stared at her. "A date," Emily said. "Not a name, not a number. A date." Fitz said quietly, "Oh, hell." "What?" Jack said. "What?" And Emily Carter said, "He didn't find something on Hayes in 1970. She could hear her own heart. "He'd had it the whole time," she said. "That's why he came to Silver Creek in the first place. That's why he changed his name. Jack Grandpa didn't stumble into Arthur Hayes." Her voice broke into pieces. "He came here for him." The bar was completely silent. Jack Reynolds sat down on a stool very slowly, like a man whose legs had stopped taking instructions. 55 years, he said. "Jack, I rode next to that man for 9 years. Jack's face was doing something awful. 9 years, and he was working in the whole time. I don't know. He was hunting something, and he never said one word. I don't know, Jack. Then what put him in Silver Creek?" Jack was on his feet again, shouting, "What in God's name does a man do that makes him change his name and move to a nothing town in the desert and spend 60 years within 4 miles of the same family?" And Fitz said, "Jack." They both turned. Fitz was standing at the end of the bar with the phone against his ear, and his face had gone completely white. "Fitz," Jack said. "That's Deacon," Fitz said. "He's out in the lot. He's got signal." Emily's stomach dropped through the floor. "Fitz what?" Fitz lowered the phone. He looked at Emily and his voice came out very flat and very careful, the way people talk when they are trying not to break something. There's a fire in Silver Creek, he said. Emily didn't move. Emily, she didn't move. Emily, honey, whose house? Emily said. Fitz didn't answer. Whose house, Fitz? And Fitz said, your grandfather's. Emily was out the door before she knew she'd stood up. She got 9 steps into that gravel lot with 40 men scattering out of her way and Jack Reynolds shouting her name behind her, and she got her hand on the truck door and Jack caught her arm and spun her around. Don't, he said. Get off me. Emily, listen. It's 40 minutes, she was screaming into his face. It's 40 minutes and it's burning right now. It's gone, Jack shouted. Emily, it's gone. It's been burning 20 minutes. There's nothing to drive to. It's his house. I know. It's the only thing I have left. And Jack Reynolds grabbed both her shoulders and shook her once hard and said, think. Emily stopped. Think, Jack said. You're a mechanic. Think like one. Why tonight? Emily's chest was heaving. Why tonight, Emily? They had the shop yesterday. They had the ledger 21 hours ago. They've had a key to that neighborhood for 55 years. Jack's grip was iron. Why do they burn it tonight at 9 o'clock on the one night in the month when every old man in this county is standing in this parking lot? And Emily Carter's whole body went still. Because they know where I am, she said. Because they know where you are, Jack said. Because somebody in Silver Creek told them. Jack didn't say anything. Emily's mind was moving now terrible and fast. Ruth knew, she said. Ruth knew I had the photograph. Emily, Walt knew. Walt told me it was the second Saturday. Walt checked this morning. Emily. Tommy knew I was going. Merrick knew I was going. Merrick sat in my driveway for 2 hours and told me which road to take. And then Emily Carter stopped talking. Because she had just heard it. She had just heard it, and it went through her like a nail. Take the 89. There's a cell dead zone past the mile 42 marker. If you're going to call anybody, call them before that. Emily's hand came off the truck. Oh, God, she said. Jack said, what? Oh, God, oh, God. Emily, what? And Emily turned around in that gravel lot with 40 men and a legend watching her and said in a voice that came out of her like something dying, he didn't tell me which road to take. Jack's face went blank. What? He told me where I'd disappear. Nobody breathed. He put me on the 89, Emily said, and she was shaking all over. And he told me exactly where the signal dies. And he told me to call anybody I needed to before that, and I did. I called nobody. I drove into a dead zone for 40 minutes, and nobody on earth could reach me. Her voice split apart. Jack, he wasn't warning me. He was timing me. Jack Reynolds turned around and looked at 40 men in a parking lot, and then he said one word quiet, and it went through that lot like a current. Deacon? Yeah, Jack. How many of us here? 41. Jack Reynolds looked at Emily Carter standing in a gravel lot in his own jacket, 26 years old. Everything she had ever owned currently on fire, 40 minutes away. Emily, he said, I need you to say it out loud, right now, in front of all of them, because once I say the next thing, it doesn't come back. Emily's hands closed into fists. Say what? Ask, Jack said. And Emily Carter opened her mouth, and what came out wasn't a plan, wasn't a speech, wasn't anything she'd rehearsed on 80 miles of empty road. Help me, she said. The lot was silent. Then Jack Reynolds said, Fitz, kill the jukebox and lock the door. And 41 men reached for their keys at the same time. Emily got as far as the truck door before Jack Reynolds took the keys out of her hand. Give them back. No. Jack, you're not driving. He put them in his own pocket. You're not driving because you're shaking and you're 26 and you'd put that truck in a wash at 90 and then they'd win and I'd have to explain to 41 men why I let Bill Carter's granddaughter die on the 89. That's my house. That was your house 40 minutes ago, Jack said. Right now it's a trap and you were about to drive straight into the middle of it with your hair on fire. Emily stood there breathing. Deacon, Jack said without turning, you still got Ruthie's number. Deacon's voice came from somewhere behind her. Jack, I ain't called that house since. I know when you last called it. Jack, do you have the number? A pause, then quiet. I never took it out of my phone. Then call it, Jack said. Right now, tell her to get in her car and drive to the church and sit in the parking lot with the doors locked and don't open them for anybody. Not a neighbor, not a cop, not a... Deacon stopped. Jack, why'd you say not a cop? Nobody answered him. Deacon walked away with the phone against his ear, and Emily heard him say, Ruthie, Ruthie, it's Bobby. And she heard the exact half-second of silence on the other end of that line 50 years wide, and then she couldn't listen anymore. She turned to Jack. Say it, she said. Say what? You know why they burned it. You knew before I did. You've known since Fitz put the phone down. So say it. Jack Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. They burned it, he said, because it wasn't in there. Emily's stomach turned to water. They had that house twice, Jack said. 71, when he was inside, they had 6 years and nobody living in it. And last night, while you were at Ruth's, they've been through every wall in that place, Emily. Twice. 50 years apart. His jaw worked. You don't burn a building you still need. You burn it when you're done with it. Done, Emily repeated. They crossed it off. So there's one place left, Emily said. And Jack said, yeah. And Emily Carter said out loud in a gravel lot 40 minutes from home, he'd rather be buried in that shop. Jack's head came around. What? That's what Tommy told Dale Whitaker. Her voice was climbing. 2 days ago, Whitaker came sniffing around about selling, and Tommy told him, I'd rather be buried in that shop than sell it. And Whitaker laughed. Jack, he laughed, and he said, she couldn't get it out. He said what? Jack said. He said that's what our grandfather thought too. The lot went dead quiet. Fitz said from the doorway, oh hell. Fitz, Jack didn't move. What year did Bill pour that floor? How would I? What year, Fitz? And Fitz said slowly, he bought that lot in 84. He bought that lot in 84, Jack said. And he put my name on the deed in 84, and he poured a 2-bay concrete slab in 84. He turned around and looked at Emily, and his eyes had gone enormous. Emily, why would a man who's been out of prison 7 years and doesn't have 2 nickels put a felon he hasn't spoken to on the deed of the only thing he owns? So it can't be sold, Emily whispered. So it can't be sold, Jack said. So it can't be bulldozed. So there is no lawyer on God's earth, no bank, no county, no judge who can move one shovel of dirt on that lot without finding me first. And I have been findable, Emily. I've been in the phone book. I've been at that bar the second Saturday of every month for 30 years. His voice cracked right down the middle. He didn't put my name on that deed because he forgave me. Emily's eyes filled. He put it there because he needed a lock, Jack said. And I was the only man alive who'd never open it. Somebody behind them said, Jack. They both turned. A man in his 60s with a shaved head and reading glasses pushed up on it. Emily would learn his name was Otis and that he had spent 31 years as a heavy equipment operator was holding up his phone. You need to see this, he said. What is it? County permit portal. Otis's voice was flat. Demolition and grading permit. 400 East Mesa Road. Emily couldn't feel her hands. When was it filed? Jack said. Filed Thursday, Otis said. Approved this morning. This morning, Emily said. That's Jack. That's before he was standing in my shop at noon, offering to buy it, and he already had a permit to knock it down. Emily. He was pretending to negotiate. Otis, Jack cut across her. When's it good for? Otis looked up. 6 a.m., he said. Tomorrow. Emily looked at the clock on her phone, 9:41. 8 hours and 19 minutes, she said. And Jack Reynolds said, get on the bikes. That's when it went sideways. Because a voice from the back of that lot said, hold on. Everybody turned. He was maybe 65 heavy-set arms crossed, and he had not moved from where he'd been standing since Fitz cleared the room. Emily didn't know him. She'd find out he was called Rooster, and that he had done 11 years in the 80s, and that nobody in that lot had ever heard him raise his voice. Hold on, he said again. Rooster, Jack said. Don't. I'm going to say it, Jack. Don't. Somebody's going to say it, and it might as well be the guy with nothing left to lose. Rooster uncrossed his arms. Jack, we're standing in a parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, about to ride into a town we haven't ridden into since 1977 behind a girl none of us ever met over a jacket that ain't even hers. Emily's face went hot. Rooster, Fitz started. No, let him, Emily said, and every head turned to her. Let him, she said again. Rooster looked at her, not cruel, worse than cruel, tired. Girl, he said, you know what happens if 41 bikes roll into Silver Creek at 11 o'clock at night? Tell me. There's a man in this lot who's got a granddaughter in Prescott he sees on Sundays and he's on paper till March. Rooster jerked his chin. That's Petey. Petey goes back inside if a deputy so much as breathes on him. There's a guy over there that's Hollis. Hollis had a stroke in April, and he's here because his wife thinks he's at the VFW. He turned back to Emily. There ain't a man out here under 60. We're not what you think we are. We're not a gang, honey. We're 40 guys with bad hips who drink on the second Saturday because it's the only night we get to be who we used to be. Nobody said anything. And you want us to go put ourselves in front of a bulldozer for a piece of paper that nobody's ever seen, Rooster said. That might not even exist, that a dead man never told a living soul about. His voice finally caught. Jack, I loved Bill Carter too, but he never asked us for a thing in 50 years. Not one thing. And now his granddaughter walks in wearing your colors, and we're supposed to just say the rest, Emily said. Rooster's jaw locked. Say it, she said. You've got one more sentence in you. Say it. And Rooster said, how do we know you ain't him? The lot went absolutely silent. How do we know? Rooster said that Hayes didn't send you. Man offers you $250,000, and you say no, girl. I've never met a person in my life who says no to $250,000. So either you're the realest thing that ever walked in that door, or you're the smartest thing Victor Hayes ever bought. And you just got 41 old men to tell you every single thing they know in about 90 minutes flat. Deacon said, Rooster, you son of a... It's fair, Jack said. Everybody stopped. Jack Reynolds turned around and looked at Emily, and his face was terrible. It's fair, he said again. Emily, it's fair. I'd have asked it 40 years ago, and I'd have asked it harder. Emily stood in the middle of 41 men with her heart slamming and every single thing she had ever wanted to say lined up behind her teeth, my grandfather. I buried him. I didn't ask for this, and she understood with total clarity that not one word of it would move that lot 1 inch. So she said none of it. She reached in her back pocket and she pulled out the printout she'd taken off her windshield at 6 that morning, the photograph of herself taken through a kitchen window with a jacket spread on a table under a good light. She held it up. Somebody read the bottom, she said. Otis took it. He put his glasses down off his head. Last offer, dear, he read, $250,000. Noon. Read the timestamp, Emily said. Otis turned it over. There ain't a timestamp. Then feel it, Emily said. It was warm, Otis. It was warm when I pulled it off my windshield at 6 o'clock in the morning outside the diner. That printer was 90 seconds away. Her voice was rising. He took that picture of me standing in my dead grandfather's kitchen at midnight, and he printed it, and he put it on my truck to let me know he could reach me and Rooster. She turned on him. Rooster, you want to know how I know I'm not his girl? Because at noon today, I stood in my shop with the door kicked in and my grandfather's tools all over the floor, and Victor Hayes looked at all of it and said, my God, Emily, when did this happen? Her voice broke and she kept going straight through it. He did it, and then he stood in it and asked me when it happened. And I'll tell you what I thought about standing there. I didn't think about the money. I thought about a man who sat in that same building for 42 years, knowing they were going to come, knowing they'd come the second he was in the ground. And he built me a gate, and he never told me because he didn't want me to have to be this. Nobody breathed. He didn't want me in it, Emily said. That's why he lied for 22 years. Not to protect himself. He'd already lost. He lied so I could grow up thinking my grandfather fixed cars. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry, quick. Well, I found out, she said, and I'm in it, and I'm the only one left. Rooster didn't move. So you can stand here and ask me if I'm bought, Emily said, and I'm not going to argue with you because you're right, you don't know me. You don't owe me a thing. Not one of you owes me anything. She turned around then, all the way around, slowly, and she stopped with her back to them with her grandfather's stitch in another man's patch and 55 years of a dead man's silence hanging between her shoulder blades. But you owe him, she said. Silence. He never asked, Emily said to nobody to a parking lot to the desert. Rooster, you're right. In 50 years, he never asked any of you for one thing. Her voice went to almost nothing. So I'm asking. The jukebox had been off for 10 minutes and nobody had noticed until right then. Then behind her, she heard a man start to cry. It was Petey. 63 years old on paper till March, a granddaughter in Prescott he saw on Sundays. "Oh, hell," Petey said. "Oh, hell." And Rooster said, "Emily." She turned around. Rooster's eyes were wet and furious. "You've got his mouth," he said. "I know." "I hated his mouth. He's pulled his keys out. Get on the back of Otis's bike. Jack rides light, he'll need his hands." They didn't ride into Silver Creek. That was Jack's rule, and he laid it out in the lot with a stick in the dirt like a man who'd done this before, which Emily understood he had. 41 bikes on Mesa Road is a story, he said. 41 bikes is a headline and a reason. That's what they want. They want a picture of a girl with an outlaw army, and then it's not about a permit anymore. It's about bikers, and Emily, that story ends the same way it's ended every time for 70 years. So what do? We come in threes, Jack said, 20 minutes apart. Nobody parks on Mesa. Nobody wears anything with a patch on it into that town tonight. Except you, and you wear it because there's no point pretending anymore. And then what? And then, Jack said, we're 41 old men who happen to be standing on a piece of private property at 6 o'clock in the morning. Otis said, Jack, they'll call it in. They'll call it in, Jack agreed. Merrick will come. Jack looked at Emily. Yeah, he said, he will. Emily's phone found signal at 10:52 and it did not stop for 4 minutes. 19 missed calls from Tommy. 11 texts. Where are you? The house, EM. The house is on fire, pick up They won't let me pass the tape Ruth is at the church, she said. You told her to go there. Merrick is here. Merrick keeps asking me where you are. And then at 10:31 he asked me what road you took. Emily sat on the back of a motorcycle at 70 miles an hour with her hand over her mouth. She called him. He picked up before the first ring finished. Tommy, listen to me. The house is gone. There's nothing. It's just the chimney. They're saying it started in the... Tommy, shut up for 10 seconds. He shut up. She could hear him breathing. What did you tell Merrick? What? When Merrick asked what road I took, what did you tell him? A long pause. I said I didn't know, Tommy said. Emily closed her eyes. Say it again. I said I didn't know, Tommy said, and his voice was small and scared and 23. I did know. I knew you were going out past the county line. You told me to my face in the driveway. And I don't know why I lied to him. He's the sheriff. I've known him my whole life, and I opened my mouth and something in my gut just went, don't. And I lied to a cop, and I've been throwing up about it for 2 hours. Emily was crying so hard she had to hold on to Otis's shoulder. Tommy. Yeah, you saved my life, she said. Silence. That's not funny. I'm not laughing. They came into town in threes, 20 minutes apart, and at 12:40 in the morning, Emily Carter walked into the parking lot of Silver Creek Methodist, and Ruth Delgado got out of a Buick and slapped her across the face. It wasn't hard. That was the awful part. It was an old woman's slap, and it barely moved her head. 22 years, Ruth said, and you didn't call me Ruth. You sent a stranger to call me. Ruth was shaking. Bobby Deacon on my phone at 10 o'clock at night saying, Ruthie, get in the car. I haven't heard that man's voice since Ray's funeral, and he wouldn't tell me anything. He just said, she stopped because she was looking past Emily's shoulder. Jack Reynolds had come up behind her. Ruth Delgado went white to the lips. No, she said. Ruthie, no. She was backing into the car door. No, you don't. You don't get to stand in a church parking lot. Ruthie, listen, get away from me. And Emily Carter said, Ruth Ray didn't do anything wrong. Ruth stopped like she'd hit a wall. The whole lot was silent. Deacon was standing 40 feet off with his hat in his hands. Fitz had turned his back. Ruth's mouth open, closed. What did you say? She whispered. Emily took her hands. They were freezing. Ruth, I need you to sit down. What did you say to me? Ruth, I have been carrying that man for 50 years. Ruth Delgado screamed, and her voice went across that empty parking lot and came back off the church wall. I buried him drunk, and I buried him ashamed, and I have gone to that grave every single Sunday for 23 years and asked him what he did. What did he do? He went home, Jack said. Ruth stopped. He went home to you, Jack said. That's what he did. That's the whole crime. Ruthie, there were three of us in a parking lot at 4 in the morning in 1971, and I'd done something stupid, and it was going to eat two of us alive. And Bill Carter looked at Ray and said, "You got a kid coming." Ruth's hands came up to her face. And Ray said, "Okay," Jack said. And he came home to you, and he never got over saying, "Okay," not one day, not 1 hour, and he drank about it for 32 years, and he never told you because he was too ashamed to make you carry it with him. No, Ruth said. Ruthie. No, he was a coward. She was sobbing now, huge and ugly in a parking lot at 1 o'clock in the morning. I thought he was a coward. I thought, oh God, I told him once. I said, "Ray, whatever it is, you're a coward for not saying it." Jack said, "Ruthie, stop." I said that to him. Ruth. Emily had her by both arms. Ruth, look at me. Ruth looked at her. Ray Delgado had 4 sons, Emily said, and every one of them had a father in the house. Ruth Delgado made a sound like something breaking. "That's what my grandfather bought," Emily said. "That's what he spent 6 years on. And you're the only person alive who got the whole thing he paid for, and you didn't even know you had it." And Ruth Delgado, 68 years old, church every Sunday. 4 boys buried a husband, went down on her knees in a church parking lot, and Emily went with her, and Jack Reynolds turned around so nobody would see his face, and 41 old men stood in the dark and let a woman cry for a husband they'd all watched drown. At 1:20, Ruth sat up. She wiped her face with a church tissue and put her chin up and said in an absolutely level voice, "What do you need?" Emily blinked. "What? You heard me." Ruth stood. "You didn't send Bobby Deacon to my house at 10 o'clock so I could cry on the asphalt. What do you need, Emily?" And Emily said, "I need to know who poured my grandfather's floor." Ruth stopped. "In 1984, Emily said, somebody poured a 2-bay slab at 400 East Mesa Road in 1984, and it wasn't him because you can't pour a slab alone. Somebody was there." Ruth Delgado stood in the parking lot with her ruined face and said, "It was Ray." Emily's blood stopped. "Say that again." "It was Ray," Ruth said. "Summer of 84. I remember because he was gone 4 nights straight, and he wouldn't say where, and I was furious. I thought there was a woman." She laughed horribly. There was no woman. He came home the 4th morning with his hands torn up and concrete in his hair, and he sat at my table and he cried, Emily, he cried, and I asked him what was wrong, and he said, she stopped. "He said what?" Jack said. Ruth's eyes were huge. "He said I finally paid him back." Nobody moved. Emily Carter turned and looked at Jack Reynolds. "It's in the floor," she said. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Emily Carter stood in the ruins of her grandfather's shop with a 5-cell flashlight and 41 men behind her, and she did what she had been doing since she was 9 years old. She read the machine. "Otis," she said, "you poured concrete. 31 years. Then tell me what's wrong with this floor." Otis walked it, slow hands in his pockets, and everybody showed up and let him. He walked it twice. Then he stopped in front of the lift and said, "Huh, what?" "Nothing." He crouched. "That's the thing. There ain't nothing." "Otis? Girl, look at your control joints." He pointed with a thick finger. "See them lines, a slab this size, you cut 'em on a grid. 12 foot on center. Whoever did this cut 'em 12, 12, 12. His finger moved and stopped. And then 9. Emily's heart came up in her throat. 9, she said. "Somebody had to cut a joint where a joint didn't belong," Otis said. "And the only reason on God's earth you do that is because you got a cold seam under there and you know it's going to crack anyway, so you tell it where." "A cold seam," Emily said. "A cold seam," Otis said, "is where somebody poured and stopped and came back." The whole shop went dead silent. "How big?" Jack said. Otis stood up. He paced it off, heel to toe. 9 by 4, he said. Emily looked down at 9 feet by 4 feet of concrete under a car lift her grandfather had installed the year she was born. "Otis," she said. "Yeah." "How long to open it?" Otis rubbed his mouth. "With a rented breaker and a healthy man," he said, 90 minutes. "And with what we've got," Otis looked around at 41 men in their 60s and 70s at 2 o'clock in the morning. 3 hours, he said, maybe 4. Emily looked at her phone. 2:11. "Then we've got 4 hours, she said, and they've got a bulldozer at 6. Jack said, "Petey, Hollis, Get the trucks across the roll-up, nose to nose. If a machine comes down that street, I want it to have to decide something. Jack, do it. Otis said, I got a breaker in my shop in Camp Verde. 50 minutes each way. Go. Jack, go. They broke it at 3:40 in the morning. Emily took the first swing herself. Nobody argued with her about it. Otis put the breaker in her hands and showed her the angle and stepped back, and Emily Carter stood over 9 feet by 4 feet of her grandfather's silence and looked at Jack Reynolds. He's going to be so mad at me, she said. Yeah, Jack said. He is. She put it through. They worked in shifts 5 minutes on because 5 minutes was all any of them had. Rooster went until his hands cramped and Petey took it off him. Hollis took 20 minutes on his own and Fitz had to physically pull him off it. Deacon carried broken concrete in a 5-gallon bucket for 2 hours without saying one word, and every time he came back for another load he was crying and nobody looked at him. At 4:30, Tommy Boyle showed up with 2 cases of water and a face like a boy at a funeral and stood in the doorway looking at 41 outlaws demolishing his boss's floor. He said, what is happening? Grab a bucket, Emily said. At 5:02, Otis's breaker hit something that wasn't rock. The sound went through that building like a struck bell. Everything stopped. Off, Otis said. Off, off, off. Get it off. Emily was on her knees in the hole before anybody could stop her digging with her bare hands, and Jack was next to her, and Ruth Delgado, who had refused to leave, who had been sitting on an overturned bucket for 3 hours with her purse in her lap, was standing right at the edge. 16 inches down, wrapped in what had been heavy plastic and was now something closer to skin, was a steel box. Ammunition can, army surplus, painted black. Emily got her hands under it. It came up out of that floor with a sound like the earth letting go of something it had been holding for 42 years, and Emily Carter sat back in the dirt with it in her lap and could not make her hands work. Emily, Jack said, I can't. Emily, Jack, I can't do it. She was shaking so hard the box was rattling. Because right now he's still my grandfather. Right now he's still the guy who fixed cars. And the second I open this, yeah, Jack said, I've already lost him once this month. Jack Reynolds put his hand on the box. Then don't open it, he said. Emily looked up. I mean it. His eyes were wet. You put it in the truck. We drive it to Phoenix. You hand it to a lawyer and you never look inside and you go home and you keep the grandfather you had. Nobody in this building would say one word about it. Not one. He looked around. Would you? 41 men said nothing at all, and that nothing was a yes. Emily sat in a hole in a concrete floor at 11 minutes after 5 in the morning. Then she said, Ruth. Ruth stepped up. Ray died not knowing what was in this, Emily said. Yes. Do you want to know? Ruth. Delgado looked at that box for a long time. My husband put his hands in wet cement for that, she said. And it killed him slow for 19 years, and he never told me why. So yes, Emily, I want to know what my husband died for. Emily nodded. Okay, she said. And she opened it. The first thing on top was a photograph. Not the 2 young men on a tailgate. Older. Much older. A studio picture, the kind they took in the 50s, cracked white across one corner. 2 boys, maybe 15 and 6. The big one had his arm around the little one, and he was scowling at the camera like he'd been told to smile and had refused on principle. And Emily knew that scowl. She had seen it across a workbench for 22 years. That's him, she said. Jack, that's him. Jack leaned in. Then Jack Reynolds said, Who's the little one? Emily turned it over. Nothing. No pencil. No name. Just a photographer's stamp. Silver Creek Photo Studio, Main Street. Emily's whole body went cold. Jack, she said. I see it. Jack, this was taken here. I see it, Emily. He said he wasn't from here. Her voice was rising and rising. My whole life, 22 years. Every time anybody asked, he said he came out from back east in 61. Under the photograph was a rubber-banded stack of paper 8 inches thick, and the rubber bands had rotted to nothing and came apart in her fingers like ash. On top of the stack was a single sheet. Emily lifted it out. It was a birth certificate. State of Arizona, Yavapai County. And Emily Carter read it, and her face emptied out, and she said in a voice that didn't have anything in it at all, That's not his name. Jack said, Emily, Emily. What's it say? She couldn't answer. Ruth took it out of her hands. Ruth Delgado held that piece of paper up in the light of a 5-cell flashlight in a hole in a concrete floor at 5:16 in the morning and read it out loud in a voice that got smaller with every word. Male child, she read, born June the 9th, 1943, Yavapai County, Arizona. She stopped. Ruth, Jack said, the name. And Ruth said, Father Thomas Vance, Mother Alma Vance. The flashlight shook. Child William Raymond Vance. Nobody made a sound. And then behind them, Rooster said, that's not possible. Everybody turned. Rooster had gone the color of paper. He was staring at that certificate like it had teeth. Rooster, Fitz said. That's not... Rooster's mouth was working. Say that name again. Vance, Ruth said. Say the whole thing. William Raymond Vance. And Rooster said, the Vances are dead. Emily's head came up. What? The Vance family. Rooster's voice was climbing into something wild. Mesa Road. My mother used to talk about it, girl. My mother wouldn't drive down Mesa Road till the day she died. Rooster, what are you talking about? They all died, Rooster shouted. In 58, the whole family, there was 14 families out on that road, and it went through them in 3 weeks, and the Vances got the worst of it, the whole house, the mother, the father, the baby. Emily was on her feet. What went through them, she said. Rooster's eyes were huge. Whatever was in the water, he said. The shop was completely silent, and then Jack Reynolds said very quietly, Emily, look at the date. Emily looked at the certificate in Ruth's hands. Born June the 9th, 1943. June 9th, she said. That's his birthday. That's Jack. That's the birthday I put on the headstone. That's the birthday we did the cake for. That's right. I know, Jack said. Emily, look at the other date. And Emily Carter looked down. Under the birth certificate, the second sheet in an 8-inch stack of paper her grandfather had put in the ground with his own hands, and a dying man's best friend was a death certificate. State of Arizona, Yavapai County, William Raymond Vance. Age 15. Date of death, October 3rd, 1958. Emily's knees went. Jack caught her. He's dead, Emily said. Jack, this says he died. This says my grandfather died when he was 15 years old. This is signed nay, there's a doctor's signature. Emily, he was legally dead for 68 years. She was screaming now. That's why nothing came back when they printed him in 71. That's why the name was clean. There was never a record of him because William Vance died in 1958 and William Carter was... She stopped. Everything stopped. Oh, Emily said. Jack said, what? Oh no. Emily, what? And Emily Carter looked up out of a hole in the floor of her grandfather's shop at 58-year-old Jack Reynolds, and her face was a thing nobody in that building would ever forget. He didn't change his name to hide, she said. Emily, Jack, they signed it. She was pointing at the death certificate with a finger that wouldn't stay still. Somebody signed on his. A doctor put his name on a piece of paper in 1958 that said a 15-year-old boy was dead, and that boy was standing right there. The flashlight was shaking in Ruth's hand. They didn't kill him, Emily whispered. They buried him on paper while he was alive. And underneath the death certificate, at the top of an 8-inch stack in a steel box in a concrete floor, was a single sheet of company letterhead. Emily could see 3 words of it, Hayes Land and Cattle Company. And in the parking lot outside at 5:41 in the morning, 19 minutes early, somebody started an engine the size of a house. Nobody in that shop moved for about 2 seconds, and then everybody moved at once. Petey, Jack was already up. Petey, where are the trucks? They're across the door, Jack. They're nose to nose. Then they're gonna push 'em, Rooster said. He was at the roll-up looking out, and his voice had gone strange. Jack, that ain't a dozer. What? That's an excavator. Rooster turned around. That's a 30-ton excavator on a lowboy, and there's a county truck behind it, and there's... He stopped. There's what? Emily said. Rooster looked at her. There's 4 cruisers, he said. Emily Carter stood in a hole in her grandfather's floor with a steel box in her arms and 8 inches of a dead man's silence in it, and she did the only thing that made sense. She laughed. It came out of her cracked and wild, and 41 men stared at her. Emily, Ruth started. No, you don't see it. Emily was climbing out of the hole. Ruth, you don't see it. 19 minutes early? He's 19 minutes early. Why name? Because because he doesn't have a permit that starts at 5:41. Emily was shouting now, and she was grinning, and it was the most frightening thing Jack Reynolds had ever seen on a human face. He filed for 6. 6 is legal. 5:41 is nothing. 5:41 is a man who found out we're in here. Jack said somebody called him. Somebody's been calling him, Emily said, since Thursday. She shoved the box at Tommy Boyle. Tommy, take it. Take it. She grabbed the back of his neck with both hands and put her forehead against his. Out the back, through the wash. You know that wash, you rode a four-wheeler in it your whole life, and there is not one man out there under 60 who can follow you. I'm not leaving you. Tommy, her voice went to nothing. You lied to a cop for me at 10:30 last night because your gut said don't. I need your gut one more time. Tommy Boyle, 23 years old, took the box. Where do I go? He said. And Emily said, Ruth, who was the one man in this town that Grandpa never fixed a car for? Ruth blinked. What? 50 years, he fixed everybody's. Who did he never touch? And Ruth Delgado's face changed. Ed Halloran, she said. The newspaper. He wouldn't take Bill's work. They had some kind of, they didn't speak. They hadn't spoken since when, Emily said. Since 1959, Ruth whispered. Emily turned to Tommy. Go, she said. He went. Victor Hayes came in through the front on foot at 5:49 with Denise Aguilar behind him and a man in a hard hat behind her, and he got 4 steps into that shop before he stopped. Because 41 men were standing on that floor, and not one of them said a word. Emily would remember his face for the rest of her life. She would remember that he did not look at Jack Reynolds or Rooster or the hole in the floor. He looked at her hands. They were empty. And Victor Hayes' composure came off like a sheet of paint. Where is it? He said. Where's what? Emily said. Where is it? Mr. Hayes. Emily wiped concrete dust off her palms slow. It's 5 in the morning. You want to tell me what you're doing on my property with an excavator? You're not allowed to start for 11 more minutes. Denise, Hayes said. The paperwork. Victor. The paperwork. And Denise Aguilar didn't move. Emily saw it. Everybody saw it. A lawyer in a good suit standing in a wrecked shop at 5:50 in the morning, holding a leather folder against her chest, with both arms looking at a hole in the floor. Denise, Hayes said again, and his voice cracked on it, and that was the sound of it ending. Victor, Aguilar said quietly, there's a hole. I can see that. You told me it didn't exist. She wasn't looking at him. You told me for 2 years it didn't exist. You told me your father was paranoid. Jack Reynolds said, Ma'am, you might want to go stand outside. Denise Aguilar looked at the hole for one more second. Then she walked out. Sheriff Dale Merrick came in at 5:52. He stopped in the doorway and looked at 41 Hells Angels standing in a demolished garage, and Ruth Delgado on an overturned bucket, and Jack Reynolds and Emily Carter in a jacket that wasn't hers. Emily, he said, Dale, you need to step outside. No. Emily, there's a lawful demolition order. For 6 o'clock, Emily said. Merrick stopped. It's 5:52, Emily said. So either you're 8 minutes early, Sheriff, or you knew you'd never have to explain it because there wasn't going to be anybody left in here to complain. Dale Merrick's face did something. Emily, you told me where the signal dies, she said. The whole shop went silent. What? Rooster said. He sat in my driveway for 2 hours, Emily said, and told me to take the 89 and told me exactly where the cell service ends and told me to make my calls before the mile 42 marker. And 40 minutes later, my grandfather's house was on fire. Her voice did not rise. That was the worst of it. You put me in a hole, Dale. That is not... Then why'd you ask Tommy what road I took? Merrick's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Say it, Emily said. Say it out loud in front of 41 witnesses and a woman from the church because I'm going to spend the rest of my life either hating you or not, and this is the only minute you get. Dale Merrick looked at the floor. Then he said, he has my son's file. The shop didn't breathe. What? Jack said. He has my son's file. Merrick's voice tore open. Marcus, 2018. There's a girl in Prescott, and there's a file, and it was never charged, and Victor Hayes has had a copy of it in a drawer for 6 years, and he has never once asked me for anything until Thursday. Dale, Ruth said. And on Thursday, he asked me where she'd go, Merrick said, and he was crying 61 years old in front of everybody. And I said the bar, and he said which road, and Dale. Bill Carter gave me to my father, Merrick screamed at her. He gave me back, and I have carried that badge for 30 years because of him, and I sat in that girl's driveway and He stopped. He put his hand over his eyes. I told her about the dead zone, he said, because it was the only warning I could figure out how to give. Nobody moved. Emily said very quietly, What? Merrick lowered his hand. He told me to send you out there, he said. He didn't tell me to tell you the signal dies. I put that in on purpose, Emily. I sat in that car for 2 hours trying to think of one sentence I could say that would sound like directions to him and sound like offense to you. His voice was ruined. I told you not to take it off. I told you not to apologize. I told you to call somebody before mile 42. I called nobody, Emily whispered. I know, Merrick said. I know you did. Victor Hayes said, Sheriff, clear this building. And Dale Merrick turned around, and he said no. Hayes's head snapped toward him. What did you say? I said no. Merrick took his hat off. You want to release that file, Victor, you go on and release it. My boy's 31 years old, and it's about time somebody made him answer for it, and I've known that for 6 years, and I've been a coward about it for 6 years. His voice steadied. But you're not doing it with me. And Rooster said, Well, I'll be damned. Hayes turned to Emily, and for 1 second, the man underneath came all the way to the surface, and Emily Carter finally saw what she'd been looking at on that porch 9 days after the funeral, and it wasn't greed, it was terror. You don't know what's in it, he said. No, Emily agreed. You don't know. He was breathing hard. You think you found evidence. You found Emily, you found a man's whole life, and he hid it from you for a reason, and the reason is... Say it, Emily said. The reason is he was there, Hayes said. The shop went dead. What? Jack said. Victor Hayes's hands were shaking. My father was 26, he said. In 1958, he was 26 years old, and he worked for his father, and there were 14 houses on Mesa Road, and there was a settling pond, and there was a sign that should have gone up, and it didn't go up for 19 days. His voice was climbing. And there was a kid, a 15-year-old kid who did yard work for the company and who was in the room when they made the phone call, and my father spent 60 years waiting for that kid to open his mouth, and he never did, and it ate him alive, and he died at 91 still asking me if we'd found it. Emily couldn't speak. Do you understand, Hayes said, do you understand what your grandfather did? He didn't fight us, he didn't sue, he didn't go to the papers. He was almost pleading now. He came back. He came back to the town that buried him on paper, and he changed his name, and he opened a garage 4 miles from my father's front door, and he waited for 68 years, and he never did anything at all. And that was the worst thing anybody has ever done to my family. Nobody breathed. And then Ruth Delgado said no. Everybody turned. Ruth stood up off her bucket with her purse in both hands. No, she said again. That's not what he was doing. Ruth, Emily started. He wasn't waiting, you stupid man. Ruth's voice was shaking with fury. He was watching. He came back and he sat in that chair for 68 years so that if you ever did it again, to one more road, to one more 14 houses, to one more set of children, there'd be one man left alive who'd been in the room. Ruth Delgado turned to Emily. That's why he never used it, she said, because the day he used it, it was spent. And Emily Carter put both hands over her face. Oh, Grandpa, she said. At 6:04 in the morning, Ed Halloran's phone rang at the Silver Creek Ledger, and a 23-year-old kid he'd never met was standing on his porch holding an ammunition can with concrete dust in his hair. Halloran was 88. He'd been running that paper since 1971. He had never once in 55 years printed the word Vance. Tommy said, Sir Emily Carter sent me. And Ed Halloran said, Son, I've been waiting for this since I was 33 years old. It took 4 months. There were 311 pages in that box. There were internal memos with Hayes Land and cattle letterhead and dates on them. There were 2 water sample analyses commissioned in September of 1958 and never filed. There was a handwritten list of 14 addresses. There was a letter from a doctor named Pruitt dated October of 1958 that a 15-year-old boy had taken out of a wastebasket agreeing to a number. And there was a death certificate for William Raymond Vance signed by that same doctor, which was how a 15-year-old kid whose whole family was in the ground had walked out of Silver Creek with nothing but a stolen file and a name that didn't exist. They'd erased him to erase the count. 14 houses, 31 dead. 32 would have been a number somebody had to explain. He'd been the number they didn't want, so he took the paperwork with him and he became the paperwork. The Attorney General's office opened it in November. Denise Aguilar walked in on her own with her own lawyer on the second day. Victor Hayes surrendered the Hayes family holdings on Mesa Road in a settlement that ran to 9 figures and did not include an apology because he never gave one. Dale Merrick turned in his badge and drove his son to Prescott himself. Rooster came to the shop every Tuesday for a year and never once said sorry for what he'd said in that parking lot, and Emily never once asked him to. And Ruth Delgado had Ramon's headstone recut. She had them take off the dates. She had them put underneath his name, "He came home." They rebuilt the floor in the spring. Otis wouldn't let anybody else do the pour. He did the whole thing himself with Tommy hauling for him, and when they got to the last 9 feet by 4, he stopped and stepped back and handed Emily a trowel. "Say something," he said. "I'm not saying anything." "Girl, he didn't," Emily said. "For 68 years, he didn't say anything. I'm not going to start now." And she finished the floor herself, and she did not sign it. Jack Reynolds died 2 years later in the spring, and Emily Carter was in the room. She was holding his hand when he said the last thing he ever said to her, which was, "You know, he never forgave me." And Emily said, "Jack, he put your name on a deed and left it there for 42 years. And Jack said, "That's not forgiveness, that's trust." And then he said, "Which is better?" And he smiled, and that was all. She keeps the jacket in the shop. Not in a case, not on a wall behind glass, because Bill Carter would have burned the building down before he let anybody put anything behind glass. It hangs on a nail over the bench where a green ledger used to sit, and the leather is still cracked, and the patch is still faded, and there's an ugly hand-stitched repair on the left shoulder that a 25-year-old mechanic put in with a curved needle in 1969 because he wouldn't let his friend pay a guy to do it. The old ones still come, fewer every year. Deacon's gone. Fitz sold the bar. Petey made it off paper in March and came in that same week and had Emily change his oil and wouldn't let her do it for free. And every once in a while, somebody young comes in, a kid with a check engine light, a girl in from Phoenix, and they see a Hell's Angels patch hanging over the workbench of a 2-bay garage in a desert town, and they always ask the same thing. "Why do you still keep that old thing?" And Emily Carter always wipes her hands and looks at it and gives them the only answer there is. "Because some things are old," she says, "but they never lose their meaning." Nobody in Silver Creek wanted that jacket. It was the only thing in this town worth anything at all.